you miss me? I've been out of it comatose, but the depression.
Hello and welcome to Controlled Burns, the hobby list podcast for me, your host, Andrew Burns, or Slow Burn from Wildfire Gaming. My wife and I listened to the first episode of the podcast now. I'm actually recording this from a hotel room in Winnie, Texas, near the coast. And I think the first episode went well. I've obviously already posted the second episode, and now I am going to go ahead and record the third one right now. Of A Tale of Blood and Sweatsocks by Mick Foley. You're going to be starting with Chapter 12. One of my first independent matches after my WCW exit was for my first wrestling boss, Tommy D. Over the next 13 months, and always worked half price in appreciation for the help he had given me years earlier. I'd set a somewhat ambitious price for myself of $250, but would work for Tommy for a cool $125. Obviously, it would be impossible to match the $1,500 a week I had been pulling down in WCW, but I looked at my independent dates as a long-term investment in myself. The show was to be held on July 7th at the Riverhead Raceway in eastern Long Island, about 30 miles from my house. Because of my close proximity to the venue, I agreed to hand out flyers at the races on the previous Saturday afternoon to help build up the matches that were set for 6 days later. It was a beautiful summer afternoon at the races, and the smell of burning rubber brought back memories of when my parents used to take me to the Comac Motor Speedway when I was a kid. I was strolling about the grounds, handing out flyers, and was pleasantly surprised at the recognition I was receiving when all of a sudden I saw it. A beautiful thin waist with a shirt that revealed just an inch or two of skin. Around the waist there was a distinctive, somewhat S&M-ish looking belt that I couldn't take my eyes off. I couldn't even see her face, but nonetheless felt like I had to meet her. She later would say she could feel me watching her, even though she could not see me. I thought over my options. I could simply walk up and introduce myself, but that would take a certain amount of guts, and I knew that it was out of the question. Instead, I saw a husband wife team of truck drivers who had said hello earlier and asked if they knew who she was. No one replied, but would you like me to find out? A minute later, they came back with good news. Her name is Colette, and she said she'd be happy to meet you. Now, I had a little more confidence, and I walked over and said, hello. Hello, I'm Colette Christie. How did you get the name Captain Jack? Uh-oh. An incorrect name right off the bat. For a moment, I had flashbacks to Cortland State, but didn't realize that this was actually a good thing. She didn't know who the hell I was, so there was no way that she could be digging me for my very small amount of fame. Then again, I wasn't so sure she was digging me anyway. Actually, it's Cactus Jack, I corrected her, and it's a wrestling name. Oh, that sounds like fun, she said, smiling. I went to wrestling matches in Madison Square Garden about 5 years ago. Have you ever wrestled there? No, I had to admit, I haven't yet. Her next question was kind of a buzzkiller. Where do you wrestle? Well, next week I'm wrestling here at the Raceway. Would you like to go? She laughed a little bit at the thought of wrestling in such a place, and I tried to cover myself by blurting out, I usually wrestle in nice places. She smiled and told me what seemed to be a sure blow off. Look, I'm just visiting my aunt and uncle here. I don't have a car, and I could only go if they came with me. Then I saw Tommy D out of the corner of my eye pointing to his watch, and I knew that it was time for my big race car angle. I felt like I had ruined my chances already, but I decided to throw out my best line anyway. Can I have your phone number? I asked with about zero confidence in my voice. I don't like to give out my number, she replied, especially because I'm at my aunt and uncle's house. You can give me yours if you like. I wrote down the number and headed off to the racetrack, doubting that I would ever see her again. When I got to the racetrack, about 10 drivers were letting their engines softly idle to prepare for the next race. The public address announcer put his arm around me and said, Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special guest here today, Cactus Jack from the world of professional wrestling. Mild applause. Cactus, we would all just like to know how you're enjoying the great town of Riverhead and the great sport of auto racing. I tried to forget about my flop with the S&M chick and got ready to rip off the funker. Thank you very much for your support, I began. You know, I'm really enjoying my time here in Riverhead. It's a beautiful town, and the people have been so nice to me since I've been here. Respectful applause. But please, don't insult my intelligence by calling the stuff you do out here a sport, or by calling these guys athletes. All of a sudden, the engine started revving in response to my cheap shot at their sport. One of the drivers, a big 230-ish kid named Eddie Dombrowski, actually got out of his car and approached me. As his name might imply, Eddie was Polish, as was most of the town. The place was crawling with people who had ski at the end of their names. Hey, Dombrowski yelled, we go out here and risk our lives every week. How can you come out here and say that we're not athletes? I really felt this was going really well, and had especially high hopes for my next words, which were straight from the Terry Funk in the horrible wrestling movie I Like to Hurt People. Look, I snarled at Eddie. I'm going to say this once, and because I know you're Polish, I'm going to say it real slow. That was great. The engines were revving and people were booing, and Eddie looked so nervous I thought he was going to pass out. In ancient times, there were only three real sports. Ancient man either ran for his life, swam for his life, or did what I do and fought for his life. One thing that I can guarantee you that primitive man did not do is get in his car and drive away. With that, Eddie gave me a shove, and I shoved him back. Racing security jumped in and held Eddie back, and when they did, I jumped him from behind, slammed his head into the hood, and then rolled him up onto his own hood, at which point I pile drove him. Fans were actually trying to climb over the fence to get to the infield, and other drivers who had no idea that I was actually just trying to promote the show tried to get at me. It really was a wild scene that ended with me getting taken off in a wire mesh paddy wagon as the fans yelled at the dastardly Cactus Jack. As I was being taken away, I thought about the girl I had met and wondered if she did anything with that belt besides wear it. Hey, I need to be honest, don't I? 3 nights later, I heard the phone ring and picked it up to hear a voice saying, "Hello, is Jack there?" "Which Jack are you looking for?" I inquired, as after all, my dad was the only real Jack in the house. "Cactus Jack," the female voice answered. "This is Cactus." "Hi, I'm Colette Christie," she said, "the girl you met at the racetrack." Moments later, I was securing my first real date in a very long time. On Thursday, the night before my big match at the raceway, I was spiffing myself up for my big night out, and my mother walked in, slightly confused by the sight of her son applying cologne for the first time in recent memory. "Where are you going tonight, Mick?" she questioned. "Out with your friends?" "Mom," I shot back with enthusiasm, "I have a date tonight with the most beautiful girl I've ever seen." My mom looked at me and quickly asked, "No, really, Mick, where are you going?" When I left the house 5 minutes later, I still don't think she was convinced that I even knew a beautiful girl, let alone was going out with one. Colette's aunt lived an hour away, so I had plenty of time to think of all the cool things I was going to say. When I got there, I realized almost instantly that I wasn't going to need any help in saying anything because we connected right away. Being boring, or more accurately, having nothing to say, had been a long-time fear of mine, a compulsion almost, which unfortunately led to avoiding conversation with strangers whenever possible. I even feared one-on-one conversation with all but my closest friends. With them, I could be myself. With everyone else, in a one-on-one situation, I was always petrified. As a result, I remember wearing headphones and keeping my head down when I walked back from classes at Cortland, just hoping that I wouldn't run into someone I knew only moderately well. I solved that problem with Colette by instantly becoming friends with her. As soon as she hopped into my black 1984 Chrysler LeBaron convertible, which had replaced the Arrow 1 I had, oh, I'm sorry, the Arrow I had abandoned on the side of the road in Pennsylvania, I was not shy about hitting her with my stupid puns and dorky jokes. She responded by actually laughing, even though once in a while she'd have to stop and ask, "Is that a joke?" As we drove to an unknown location, she fumbled with the radio, and when she started singing along with a country song, I felt like I might be falling in love. After all, a girl who was born in Queens and had grown up in Manhattan actually singing country music was something I had never even considered. I remembered back to a time when I was 18 and I had 2 tickets to the Willie Nelson picnic at Giant Stadium and had to give them to my parents because I could not find one person, male or female, who wanted to go with me. Then again, maybe it wasn't the country music that was the turnoff, maybe it was me. We finally ended up in a small bar in Rockville Center right across from the office building where the Apter wrestling magazines are published. I fed the jukebox with quarters and got to know Colette a little bit while Tweeter and the Monkey Man by the Traveling Wilburys played. Colette explained that she had been a model for a long time, but that at 29 she was now too old for the business. Her father, with whom she had been very close, had died a few months earlier, and Colette had been so distraught that she had been unable to work. As a result, she was planning on going to live with her mother in Florida. She was staying with her aunt and uncle just long enough to get her things, and then she would be Sunshine State bound. We decided that we could at least have some fun until she left, and that maybe I could stop by and visit her in Florida sometime if I was in town for a match. I think, however, that I may have been too charming for my own good, especially singing all the words to Forever in Blue Jeans by Neil Diamond. I firmly believe that when you find a girl that you feel strong enough to sing Neil Diamond in front of, especially on the first date, well, man, you've got to hold on to that girl. By the way, do you know who else knows all the words to Forever in Blue Jeans? The tattooed tough guy wrestler Midian. By the time I got back to Colette's aunt's house, I had already confessed to actually being named Mick and not Jack. After all, I didn't want to have to put on my act around this girl. I wanted the freedom and honesty of being my own dorky self. She invited me in for tea, and I accepted, being the tea-loving son of a bitch that I am. It was there that I met Confusion, Colette's Shetland sheepdog of 10 years, and spotted a book with Colette's picture on it that I asked if I could see. It turned out to be Colette's modeling portfolio. Now, I feel like I have to admit right here that I had certain doubts about the validity of Colette's alleged modeling career. Sure, I thought she was beautiful, but I'd met a lot of girls who said they modeled, and at most it turned out to be a few had shots in a local underwear ad. Hell, even the Godfather's hoes consider what they do to be modeling. Instead, I was blown away by what I saw. Real pictures, real ads. Revlon, Avon, Tropical Blonde, Maiden Form, book covers. This was impressive. This wasn't someone claiming to be a Guess Jeans model. This was a real model. Next, I turned the page and saw a two-page layout that nearly knocked me for a loop. I know that ad, I yelled, but what is it? That's a campaign I did for Burlington Legs, she replied, either being completely modest or trying to sound modest, like I do when I tell stories about my matches in Japan. But where have I seen it? I begged. I know that ad from somewhere. Used to be on the New York City buses, she informed me. In fact, the ad took up the whole bus. That's it, I gushed. I loved that picture. My friends loved that picture. We used to talk about that picture. This was great. I just had a date with a supermodel and had swept her off her feet with an 84 LeBaron, a Neil Diamond song, and very little else. I even got a kiss goodnight and was called the correct name to boot. As I drove the hour back to Setauket, I couldn't help feeling that I was going to be letting the perfect woman go when she took off for Florida, and I comforted myself with the hope that I'd maybe get to nail her. My wife and I got a personal kick out of this word, which is why I use it here, before she left. As it turns out, all of my fears were for naught, as she came to the matches to see me on Friday, went to the movies to see Ghosts on Saturday, took a day off from Foley on Sunday, and moved across the street from me into the room my neighbors were renting out on Monday. The Foley charm had simply been too much to resist. For the rest of the summer, we were inseparable, except for my shows, during which time she and my mother hung out anyway. We spent a lot of time at the beach, went on road trips, and in a situation that was a little bit awkward, made many strange noises upstairs directly over Joe and Martha Fort's bedroom, so that my neighbors of 24 years never looked at little Mickey the same way again. After a few weeks of fun in the summer sun, I offered to show Colette a tape of me wrestling. I just knew she was going to be impressed. She wasn't. I was a little hurt and asked why. She got real serious and said, I don't like the way you allow yourself to be slapped around out there. You're better than that. I had often talked to Colette about my desire to go back to one of the big two, and she saw this somewhat goofy act as being a stumbling block in front of something good. You're better than that, Mickey, she kept saying. You're better than that. Without any real knowledge of wrestling, she had more or less surmised what Frank Dusek had said a year earlier. You're a goof, and goofs will never be top guys. Maybe she had a point. Bruiser Brody didn't look like an imbecile when he was alive. Stan Hansen didn't make his time or his name doing a Keystone Cops routine. I decided at that point to veer away from so much comedy and concentrate on getting vicious. For the next year, I tried my best to scare fans when I went to the ring, and many times, especially in front of a small crowd, I would leave a high school gym or armory looking like a tornado had gone through it. I became fond of swinging chairs and had the best match on almost every card I was on, and ended up turning in very solid performances with a variety of different wrestlers in a variety of different states and countries. Around this time, I met a man named Herb Abrams at a wrestling convention in New York. It was there that Herb held a press conference and announced the formation of his new Universal Wrestling Federation, or UWF. In addition, he announced Cactus Jack was a signee with the company, which was a handshake deal that we had just agreed to. Herb really felt that his new group would instantly join the Big Two and felt confident that in time it would become number one. When someone at the conference asked how he could feel so sure without having a background in wrestling, Herb replied, what they're looking for, I have, and that's the Hollywood glitz. Herb also announced Bruno Sammartino as his color commentator and himself as play-by-play man, an idea that would prove to be entertaining if not exactly wise. To know Herb Abrams was to like him, or at least be amused by him, as he was a true cartoon character. About 5'4" with a small frame, Herb realized that he would never make it in the wrestling business he loved so much unless he brought his own money. His own company. I don't know where he got his money, but man, did he spend it, as he brought in a crew of guys that actually had more talent than the rosters of either of the big two. The guys he brought in had legitimately been huge names and had drawn big money around the globe. The list reads like a who's who of wrestling, with Paul Orndorff, Dr. Death Steve Williams, Don Morocco, Bob Orton, B. Brian Blair, Danny Spivey, Billy Jack Haynes, Sid Vicious, Ken Patera, Colonel De Beers, David Sammartino, Jimmy Snuka, and even Andre the Giant being only some of the guys he brought in. Even with all these guys, Herb Abrams was the star. At least that's what he thought. I remember watching his show, which was a pretty difficult thing to do. Despite his prediction, the Hollywood glitz was nowhere to be seen as we toiled away in a dingy nightclub that seated at most 300 people. And believe me, there were not usually 300 butts in those seats. Even with all the top names, I was the crowd favorite at the nightclub, even though I was technically a bad guy. Maybe it was the Welcome to the Jungle music that Herb had made my entrance theme, or maybe it was the Unpredictable moniker that Herb had placed before Cactus Jack, the same one that had worked so well for Johnny Rods. Anyway, during the show, there was an advertisement for wrestling cookies, which I guess Herb felt was the natural snack choice of all wrestling fans. Herb's grating voice was doing the talking as he hailed the benefits of Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff cookies, Wild Thing Steve Ray cookies, and coming soon, Herbie cookies. He did the same thing with merchandise. Herb somehow landed a deal for his Blackjack Brawl, not only to be held at the prestigious MGM Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas, but also to be carried live around the country on Sports Channel. What a sight it was to see 200 fans in a 22,000 seat building. But hey, Herb was ready, and no one could say that Vince McMahon had anything over Herb in the marketing genius category. After all, he did air 10 commercials for UWF merchandise during the Blackjack Brawl, even if all of them did push only one product, the Mr. Electricity Herb Abrams t shirt. I asked his girlfriend after the show how he got the Mr. Electricity nickname, and she put her hands over her head, shook her hips, and gave a very animated, because when he plugs it in, he really turns me on. I think that it was at the MGM show that Herb's announcing skills really came to the forefront. He had invited me to his suite at the hotel to show me a big surprise. Herb had an incredible 6 room penthouse suite that offered an unbelievable view of Las Vegas. When I got there, Herb had a bandage pressed to his lips from a wound that he had suffered while wrestling with his buddies in the suite. His surprise? A new UWF championship belt and a pair of yellow and green ostrich skin boots that he swore the fans were going to go nuts over. Well, maybe the fans didn't go nuts, but the wrestlers certainly did, as Mr. Electricity strutted out to the ring with the belt and the ostrich boots. There may have only been a few hundred people in the cavernous arena, but they were Herbie's people, baby, and he was giving them what they came to see. His announcing that night was truly memorable, as in addition to the fat lip, he was drowning cocktails throughout the show and was totally hammered by the time he interviewed Little Tokyo, who just won the prestigious Midgets World title. Congratulations, Little Tokyo, Herb slared. Maybe you have some sake tonight to celebrate. Little Tokyo's eyes grew wide, and he replied in astonishment. How do you know sake? To which Herb offhandedly said with a shrug, Oh, I was married to a Jap once. I've got to hand it to Herb, however, as the night in Las Vegas, I got to live out a dream when I wrestled the Superfly Jimmy Snuka in a lumberjack match, in which the other wrestlers were to stand outside the ring to ensure the action didn't spill outside. There were a few problems with the match, however, as no one ever assigned any lumberjacks to the match, and we had no idea what Herb wanted out of it. As a result, I began asking wrestlers to be lumberjacks, an invitation that many declined, and as a result had a threatening group of lumberjacks consisting of 2 male wrestlers, 2 women, 2 midgets, and 3 security guards as we got set to go out. Thankfully, Jack Mulligan got control of the situation and made wrestlers go out to the ring and help us. The end of the match posed a problem, as Herb didn't want me to lose, and there was no way I was going to let Jimmy lie down for me. As a result, we did the exact thing that lumberjack matches are supposed to prevent. We fought to a double countout. The lumberjacks were baffled as we fought outside the ring and into the empty stands. Where are you guys going? B. Brian Blair yelled to us as he gave chase into the 27th row. It's a double countout, I yelled as the Fly and I continued to trade punches. But you can't do that in a lumberjack match, Blair said, laughing in disbelief. Hey, it's Herb's show, I said right back. We can do anything. A few months later, I read of Herb's passing in a wrestling newsletter. I called over Colette, who had gotten to know Herb pretty well, and began reading the article, but couldn't get through it without laughing in spite of myself. Like his life, Herb Abrams' death had been way over the top. Apparently, someone had alerted the police to disturbance in a high rise office in Manhattan, and when they got there, they found women screaming in the hallway and little Herb running around naked, bathed in baby oil, and swinging a baseball bat, with which he was destroying furniture. He was taken into custody and died shortly after from a massive heart attack. Colette and I sat down and mourned Herb's death by sharing stories of his life and laughing at what a character he had been. I think Herb would have liked it that way. In March 1991, I headed to Japan for a 1 month tour of Japan for All Japan Wrestling, which was owned by legendary promoter and wrestler Giant Baba. Baba was one of those great mysteries I've never figured out, in that fans went absolutely nuts over his every move, most of which looked like they couldn't break an egg. Still, Baba had run the successful promotion for decades, and I was excited about my trip as I really felt like it might turn into a full-time job. All Japan ran regular tours throughout the year, and some Americans, like Stan Hansen, worked them all, which added up to 26 weeks a year. I'd been a fan of Japanese wrestling for years, ever since seeing my first Tiger Mask Dynamite Kid match at Brian Hildebrand's house in 1986. I had since amassed a huge library of Japanese tapes, which I studied diligently for hours every day in the basement apartment at Huntington that Colette and I had moved into a few months earlier. Opened up a Thomas Harris book called Red Dragon as we took off from JFK and was just finished when the plane touched down in Narita Airport. I had trained hard for this match, both mentally and physically, and was ready to take on the Orient. I did well in All Japan. So well, in fact, that rumors started circulating about a 20-week-a-year offer that was going to come my way. This was great. There would be no politics or Ole Anderson to shove me down, and I could feel fulfilled living out my wrestling fantasies 8,000 miles from home. I ran into trouble at the end of my first week when I broke 3 ribs in a match with Jumbo Tsuruta, and even more when I broke Johnny Ace's elbow at the ending of week number 2. I was attempting to suplex Ace, who was Shane Douglas' fellow Dynamite dude in WCW, backward off the top rope, a move that he intended to counter by turning it into a cross body block that would end up with Johnny on top of me, as I bumped backward to the mat. Unfortunately, when I tucked my chin to my chest to protect myself, I also clamped Ace's arm under my chin too, and he was unable to get free in time. When we hit, I heard him groan, and I knew he was hurt, and I knew I was screwed. Johnny was Mrs. Baba's favorite wrestler, which suddenly put me out of favor with her. Seeing as how many people felt she actually had more influence on the company than her husband, being out of favor with her was not a good place to be. I called Colette after the match and explained the injury. "That's it, Mick," she yelled enthusiastically. "You show them that they can't push you around." When I explained to her the ramifications of the injury, however, her enthusiasm quickly withered. I later found out, years later, that I had other things working against me in Japan as well, none of which had to do with the quality of my matches, which had been high. I had come to Japan as a big fan of Bruiser Brody, who had run roughshod over not just the Japanese wrestlers, but their fans as well. The fans loved it, as you could see, with huge smiles on their faces as they ran from Brody as he threw punches at whoever was dumb enough to stick around. They didn't sue over things like that in Japan, they considered it a compliment. I even watched in shock when we got off the bus at Korakuen Hall in Tokyo and saw one of the wrestlers punch a fan who got too close, right in the face. I was even more shocked to see the same fan bow down while holding his face and say, thank you very much." This place was crazy, and even though I wasn't into punching fans, I got prepared to play along. Over the course of my first few weeks, the pre-Ace injury weeks, I had made it a habit of diving into the crowd. I would charge a guy and he would backdrop me into the fans. I would shoot another guy into the metal guardrail and he'd reverse it, and I'd end up flying backward into the crowd. It was as if all of Japan was my personal mosh pit. Unfortunately, however, fans were getting hurt, not just from me landing on them, but in their attempts to get out of the way of my 287 pounds as well. Just as unfortunately, the Japanese wrestling publications had taken to calling me the American Onita in honor of a popular hardcore FMW, frontier martial arts wrestling, wrestler, and had taken to calling my matches FMW style. Apparently, this didn't sit well with Baba, who considered the Anita led FMW to be garbage wrestling and certainly didn't enjoy the comparison. Eventually, referee Joe Aguchi came to me and said sadly, "Jackson," san in Japan is a sign of respect, "Mr. Baba asks you, please stop hurting fans." It wasn't the last time that Aguchi came to me with a request from Baba, as a short while later he became the bearer of bad news again. "Jackson," poor old Joe said sadly again, "Mr. Baba wants you to wear nicer clothes." Didn't he get it? I thought as I looked at my suede fringe Indian boots and red flannel. It's not the clothes, it's me. The rest of the guys, for the most part, wore loose athletic pants and tank tops or sweatshirts. If I was put in those same clothes, I would still look bad. Hell, years later in the World Wrestling Federation, I wrestled in a tuxedo just because they knew how bad I would look in stylish clothes. In retrospect, I'm glad I didn't figure all this out until later because I would have had a miserable time. As it was, I wasn't exactly having the time of my life, as I missed Colette terribly, to the point that I was writing her letters daily, which I later burned and buried so that I would never have to risk my children finding out just how lonely a guy their dad had been over in Japan. At the end of 2 weeks, the Funk brothers were flown in for the second part of the tour. Terry and his brother Dory had helped build the entire sport in Japan, and to this day are loved by the fans for their 30-year history there. I was excited as hell to finally have a match with the Funker, whom I had remained in contact with since we both split from WCW. I loved Terry's style, and during the course of my career have borrowed liberally from it, a fact that the Funker was honored by when I asked his permission to rip him off shamelessly. "Cactus Jack," he had told me just a few months earlier, "you can take anything of mine you want because the old Funker is just about done." 9 years later, at age 54, he is doing somersaults off 10-foot balconies. No matter what mannerisms I borrowed, I knew that I would never throw a punch like Terry's, which was truly a thing of beauty. Many people, including me, considered the Funker's big left hand to be the nicest punch in the business. A few minutes into the big match, Terry took me into the corner and I saw him rear back with a big left. This was going to be great. Here it comes. Thwack! I felt like I did when I was 8 and my mother came clean about Santa Claus. I had just learned the hidden secret of the great Funk left hand. It was simple. I've been a fool for not knowing the whole time. Terry Funk had just punched me as hard as he could in the forehead. "No wonder that punch looked so good," I later whined to Terry. "You hit me as hard as you could." "Oh, Cactus Jack," Terry mumbled and laughed in his kindly Uncle Old Terry way that made it impossible to be angry with him. "All this time you thought I was really just good." I got to know Stan Hansen well in Japan, and in an odd way, he went on to play a major role in my life. Stan was a true superstar in Japan, and he had been there so long that he was almost a part of the culture. He had been Brody's partner for several years, and I think he kind of liked the little bit of Brody he saw in me. Hanson was known as the stiffest of all the American wrestlers, and his lariat or clothesline was a destructive force, partly because of the force he threw with it, and partly because he could barely see without his glasses and had no idea where he was hitting guys with it. Hanson was a legitimately tough guy, but like most tough guys, he didn't feel the need to prove it. He was actually a true gentleman outside the ring. Sensing that I was not a party guy, Stan kind of took me under his wing and began bringing me out with him so that I wouldn't just sit for hours in my room as he correctly guessed I would have. He was also a great family man who talked so much about his kids that I seriously began to think about having a little one of my own. Colette had talked to me about the idea before, but I had never felt ready for the responsibility. I walked out of Shakey's all-you-can-eat pizza restaurant one early afternoon and told Stan that I'd catch up with him later as I had a phone call I needed to make. As Stan walked away, I dialed the United States, where it was about 11 o'clock at night. "Hello?" Colette sleepily answered. "Who is it?" "It's me," I said anxiously, followed by, "Would you like to have a baby?" When I came home, I was exhausted, sore, and at $1,500 a week for 4 weeks, about 6 grand richer. My ribs had bothered me for the entire trip, to the point that I had to wear a flak jacket afterward for several months. I had a trip to the Caribbean island of Aruba a few days later and brought Colette with me. It was there with dedication, hard work, and relentless repetition that we went about the arduous task of conceiving a child. I had been warned over the years by other wrestlers that I might be risking damage to my reproductive system by the constant pounding I was taking on the cold, hard concrete floor. Because of the high impact landings, they feared that I might not be able to have a child. In Aruba, I was determined to prove those experts wrong. I had some tremendous matches as an independent, but will probably best be remembered during this time for the series of matches I had with Eddie Gilbert for Joel Goodhart in Philadelphia. Goodhart ran the Tri State Wrestling Association, or TWA, which was the precursor of Extreme Championship Wrestling, or ECW. He believed in a hardcore, bloody style and had his own theory on what made a show successful. "Most groups' first match doesn't mean anything," he was fond of saying, "but our guys are different. We want the first match to go all over the building so people can't wait to see what's next." Now, this might sound like simple logic, but to me it flies in the face of the scientifically proven three-ring circus theory of wrestling, in that there is something for everyone. If you don't like the clowns, you would like the elephants, and so on and so forth. To me, Joel's shows were the circus equivalents of seeing a guy get shot out of a cannon 30 times. On small shows and little high schools, Joel would force feed this repetitious menu of violence for so long that most people looked like they would never want to attend wrestling again upon leaving. ECW is often much the same way, but they have a much better assortment of characters to have some fun with. As he was my most consistent booker, however, I was very thankful to Joel. His quarterly extravaganzas in the Philadelphia Civic Center were the biggest independent shows in the country. It was in these shows that my matches with Eddie took place. After seeing Eddie and me in action in late 1990, Joel booked us in a Falls Count Anywhere match, Pinfalls Count Anywhere in the building, a few months later. I consider that match to be the best of my career for 2 years, right until my match at Beach Blast in June 1992 took over the honors. On the heels of that, Goodart asked me if I would be interested in doing a barbed wire match with Eddie. And these days, until Japan raised the bar by taking down the ropes and stringing up wire in its place, barbed wire was simply strung up between the ropes. While it wasn't as dangerous as the conditions I would later wrestle in, it still was no day at the beach, and I knew the considerable risk went along with it. I was very tentative about doing the match unless it was done under the right conditions, and one of my conditions was that the match team make it seem special by keeping it as the sole gimmick on the card. "I'll do it," I told Joel, "but only if we cut down on the blood in the other matches." I drove to Philadelphia with Colette, who by this time had already seen enough injury and punishment inflicted on me to be concerned about my match, let alone one with barbed wire involved. I was nervous yet excited about the match, and I was getting dressed when I saw a preliminary wrestler walk by with a little trickle of blood on his forehead. That's odd, I thought, but went back to getting ready. A minute later, another wrestler, another trickle. I started to become concerned. Next, I saw another wrestler walk in who had not a trickle of the red stuff, but a whole face full of it. Now I was worried. Who's going to watch my gore fest with Eddie if all of Joel's wrestling school guys were bleeding in the first match? I asked one of the guys with the trickle, let's just call him Trickle number 1, what was going on. "Oh, we were in the Battle Royal," he said. "So why are you bleeding from a battle royal, I want to know?" "It's a last blood battle royal," he quickly replied. "Last blood?" I asked disbelievingly, even though I really knew the answer to my own question. "Yeah," Trickle number 2 piped in. "The last guy not bleeding is the winner." Immediately, I ran out and caught the last 5 minutes of one of the sorriest affairs I'd ever seen. 10 guys, some of whom had never had a match before, were fighting in and around the ring. They were trying to poke, prod, gig, hit, and bust one another and themselves in an attempt to draw blood. So much for cutting down the blood in the other matches. Eddie and I were forced to turn up the volume in our match even higher than we would have. As a result, the match was actually ruled a no contest when I became so badly wrapped up in the barbed wire that I couldn't get out. Normally, a no contest ruling would be reason to riot in Philly, but because of the serious nature of the predicament I was in, the fans were respectful. Actually, they were pretty concerned. Even when Colette came out to check on me, I didn't hear a single cat called, even though compassion was usually a dirty word to Goodhart's fans. In the ring, meanwhile, Eddie was doing a number on a number of other wrestlers after pile driving the referee. After the match, the strangest occurrence took place as the referee was brought out on a gurney and placed into the ambulance. I was lying in the hall with several holes in me. Eddie had passed out from blood loss and exhaustion, and the referee was rushed to the emergency room for the simple reason that he was afraid to tell the EMT people that he was faking it. Goodhart was excited about the match and all the media attention that he was receiving because of it. A few weeks after the barbed wire match, he told me of his master plan, a 2 of 3 falls match with Gilbert and me, with each match being a gimmick match. Together we came up with the matches: a falls count anywhere, a stretcher match, the loser is the first one unable to get up, and a steel cage match. To do all of these in one night would certainly be challenging, not to mention exhausting, and I embarked on a rather strenuous training program for the big night. I actually felt like I was in the best shape of my career as I pulled into the Civic Center. What followed were 40 minutes of what Eddie Gilbert actually called the best matches in his life. Coming from Eddie, that was high praise, as he was one of the most talented and hardest working guys in the business before his untimely death 3 years later in Puerto Rico. When I was given the chance to come back to WCW following the 3-day match, Eddie was invited as well. As a matter of fact, we had the same starting date, but Eddie didn't show. Part of the reason Eddie explained on the phone was that he didn't want to tarnish the reputation of what he and I had accomplished. After leaving WCW under less than ideal circumstances a year and a half earlier, Eddie felt that he was going to be punished upon his return, and part of his punishment, as he saw it, was to be placed in situations where he could never live up to our reputation for great matches. How could we? In TWA, we had pulled out all the stops and had engaged in what would more accurately be called wars as opposed to matches. WCW would never allow that to happen, and Eddie refused to give anyone Gilbert versus Cactus unless it was allowed to be done right. We tried to resurrect our history after I left WCW in 1994, but could never quite get it done. I regret that. I also regret not wrestling on the first Eddie Gilbert memorial card right before I went to the World Wrestling Federation because I know it would have meant a lot to his brother Doug and his mom and dad. The best I can do is remember Eddie for what he was to me: a teacher, a mentor, and a friend. Chapter 13. I had wrestled independently for the past 14 months. In that time, I had improved tremendously, gained valuable confidence, learned to work the mic, and had a much better idea of who I was in the ring and what I was trying to accomplish. Unfortunately, my bank account had not expanded at the same rate that my wrestling had, and with Colette, 2 months pregnant, I decided to more actively pursue more gainful employment. At the time, one of the promotions I was wrestling for was Joe Pedicino's Global Wrestling Foundation, which was using my old stomping grounds at the Dallas Sportatorium as its base of operations. Supposedly, Joe had a backer from Nigeria who had $10 million to invest in the promotion, but I'd been around too long and heard too many rumors and promises to believe anything I heard. So, with nothing to lose, I boarded a bus from New York to Baltimore to serve as a special guest on a wrestling trip to the Great American Bash. This had historically been one of WCW's premier events, but WCW was in a state of disarray. Ric Flair had just left the company, and "We Want Flair" chants echoed throughout the arena. Both the show in Baltimore and the promotion seemed to lack direction. After the show, I made my way backstage and said hello to some of the boys. I introduced myself to Magnum TA, one of the assistant bookers for the company. One time, Magnum was a main event wrestler, a definite future world champion whose career had been cut short due to a tragic car accident. Magnum didn't exactly gush all over me. I guess he hadn't been privy to my feud with David Sammartino, but he did offer some encouragement. 2 weeks later, WCW came to the Meadowlands Arena in New Jersey. Colette and I decided to go. After all, in this business, as in many others, if you're out of sight, you're out of mind. I almost didn't get into the back until Paul E. Dangerously, who would later play a much larger role in my life as the genius behind ECW, granted us access. I'd said hello to some of the guys, including Barry Windham. If you remember the Barry Windham of 1987 to 1991, you would surely recall one of the best wrestlers in the game. Barry was not someone that I was especially close with, but he pulled me aside and told me that the company was desperate for talent, and that if I stuck around, there was a good chance that I could get hired. 2 days later, Magnum called with the news that it would change my life. I should probably point out that for the previous few weeks, I had been in touch with Kevin Sullivan, who had gathered together another band of misfits and thought that I would be a perfect fit. "I've been talking about it with the Dream, Dusty Rhodes, and we think we've come up with a good spot for you." That's Magnum TA. "Really? Is it with Kevin's guys?" I asked. "No, we'd like to put you into a program right away with Sting." Sting! Man, that was like hitting the jackpot. Sting was the number one man in WCW, a well-built, charismatic athlete with spiked bleached hair and a painted face. The Stinger was not the greatest interview in the world, but his athletic ability and his enthusiasm usually made up for it. Sadly, Sting's marquee value had dropped slightly over the past several months due to poor opponents and lackluster feuds. That's where I came into the picture. I later learned that this run with Sting, as well as my stint in WCW, were planned to be short lived. The Office, knowing of Sting's slightly shriveling value, hoped to feed him a string of monster heels in rapid fire succession. Jim Ross, who apparently had been trying to sell Dusty on me for quite a while, was able to volunteer me for this limited role. It was thought that a quick conquering of so many monsters in such a short time would boost Sting's image, enabling him to draw more money with a real wrestler. In retrospect, I guess I'm lucky I didn't know of this plan because I flew to Sioux City, Iowa without the pressure of that knowledge. Believe me, I was relieved to see that the Steiners were not on the board against me. Instead, my opponent for my return to WCW was the notorious Larry Santo, notorious for both the worst looking tights and best pained facial expressions of the underneath wrestlers. I was flattered that many of the WCW wrestlers gathered around the monitor to watch the return of Cactus Jack. Apparently, Rick Steiner was my biggest fan in the back as he encouraged the other wrestlers to watch this and wait till you see this. I didn't disappoint. I felt like this was a big moment and I took advantage of it. I actually received a nice response from the crowd, the kind of response that said, "We missed you." It's funny, sometimes people perceived as big stars leave for a while and receive no response when they return. I guess I had carved out a reputation with my work ethic, reckless style, and tight, firm buttocks. What the hell? This was a triumphant return for me as I dropped the big elbow on Santo on the concrete, performed the flying upside down Cactus Jack crack smash, front somersault, off the ring apron, and offered the WCW debut of the double arm DDT, a move that I blatantly stole from Kenta Kobashi of All Japan Wrestling. But hey, what the hell? They've stolen half a dozen moves from me. At one point, Jim Ross added to the drama with one of his classic calls. "My goodness, Larry Santo has a family, and Cactus Jack doesn't care." Over the years, Ross has added so much to my mini matches that I'll often visualize moves with his announcing calls in mind. Later that night, I was given a chance to do a few 30-round interviews, 30-second interviews, for the company's syndicated television shows. I cut a promo on Sting that ended with the line, "When you feel that lump in your throat, it won't be emotion, it will be your liver." I also did a promo where I talked about having trouble sleeping and having to count all the ways I would hurt Sting in order to get some shut-eye. "I fell asleep at 7:89 and I haven't even gotten to your legs yet," I squealed. Apparently, Diamond Dallas Page, at the time solely a manager and not yet the master of the diamond cutter, ran to Dusty and said, "You've really got to take a look at this guy." I think WCW opened their eyes to Cactus Jack in a pretty big hurry. A few days later, I received another call from Magnum requesting that I come to Philadelphia. Nikita Koloff had quit the company and Sting had no opponent for the next few evenings. I drove with Colette to the show where I had a most interesting conversation with Sting. At this point in time, my match with Larry Santo hadn't aired yet, and I had never been informed as to just exactly what my role was supposed to be. Hey, according to Magnum, I was coming in as the top guy. "Hey," said Sting, "do you have any ideas?" "Yeah, actually, I've got a lot of ideas," I said enthusiastically. "Man, that's great. I'm so tired of working with guys who don't have any." I proceeded to share my thoughts, some of which were pretty wild. Sting's eyes grew wide. "Hey, I thought you were just coming in here to put me over." "I know," I replied, "but I don't see any reason why I can't get myself over at the same time." Singh looked at me as if this was a completely foreign idea, and in many ways it was, because with the exception of Flair, it had been a long time since Singh had wrestled anybody who could accomplish both at the same time. Aware of the attention that we were attracting, Sting asked me to step into the bathroom. He looked somewhat worried, not because he thought I was going to jump him backstage or anything, but because I did have a reputation for being a little bit strange, and maybe he felt like this whole Cactus Jack idea was a mistake. "Do you really expect Sting, a guy who's been pushed on top for 5 years, to go 50-50 with a guy who hasn't been on TV?" the son Sting asked. "Yes," I stated simply. "Why?" he wanted to know. "Because I feel that with 1 month of TV exposure and 1 month of interviews, I can get over, and therefore be in a better position to get you over." This was actually a very lofty goal, but I was so full of confidence that I wouldn't take no for an answer. "Look," I said, getting a little impatient, "let's just set up one thing. If it doesn't get a reaction that you like, we won't do anything else. If it does, we'll work from there." So that's how we felt left it. Me ready to take on the world and Sting wondering whom he'd pissed off to draw this assignment. When we did get our first series of moves, culminating with me taking a big bump over the guardrail, the crowd went crazy. Sting got a big smile on his face. The rest of the match went off probably without a hitch. As a matter of fact, it was probably one of Sting's better matches in a while. When we got backstage, Sting was excited. He'd actually found someone he could look forward to wrestling. He shook my hand, and I can honestly say that we never had another problem after that. He's someone I considered one of my favorite all-time opponents, and in the back of my mind, I'd still like to lock up with him one more time before I'm through. Abdullah the Butcher, my opponent from a year earlier, was another of the wrestlers brought in to feed Sting. With the success of Cactus Jack, the feeding angle was stopped, and Dusty decided to team me up with Abdullah. Abby was one of the great monsters in the business. In real life, Abby was a sharp businessman and an even sharper dresser who now owns and operates Abdullah the Butcher's House of Ribs in Atlanta. He chewed unlit cigars and spoke with a surprisingly high voice, and was a man with such class that he once held a fart in for over 200 miles so as not to offend my wife, who was traveling with me. There was a small bit of irony attached to this team. As a freshman in college, I had taped a picture of Abdullah to my wall, and by the end of the year had everyone in Fitzgerald Hall believing that Abdullah the Butcher was my father. Strange when you consider that Abby was a 400-pound black man with grooves carved into his head so deep that he used to flip out people in casinos by inserting gambling chips into them. At the end of August, Magnum asked to speak with me in Richmond, Virginia. He had a contract with him that he wanted me to sign. The contract was for a first year of $78,000 and an option for a second year at $156,000. Now, coming from my $10 days at the Polka High School, this seemed like a lot of money, but I had two things going for me. One, I still believed that Joe Pedicino had a $10 million backer, and the contract offer of $100,000 he had given me was legitimate. And two, I had a great belief in myself. I don't want to seem like a big shot, but I've got an offer of $100,000 in global that would have me home in my bed 4 nights a week, I said. Of course, the $10 million man never did appear. Cactus, that 78 grand is just the dangling carrot. After a year, you'll get 156, Madam countered. I thought about it and speak from my heart to a guy who knew what it was like to have his career taken away from him and said, Magnus, you see me wrestle. With my style, there might not be another year for me. I need 156 now. That logic seemed to hit home with Magnum as he quietly said, That might be possible. I'll speak with Jim Hurd. Hurd, a former Pizza Hut bigwig, was at that time the president of WCW. In the afternoon of September 4th, 1991, Jim Hurd approached me in Albany, Georgia, the site of that evening's Clash of the Champions. Hurd had a reputation as a hard ass, so I didn't know quite what to expect when he opened his mouth. What followed was the shortest contract negotiation in history. Cactus, Magnum told me what you wanted, and he said he thinks you're worth it, and so do I. I'll have legal draw up the contract. That was it. With those few words, I was now making 6 effing figures. On the Clash in Albany, Sting had a match with Johnny B. Bad, Mark Marrow, the future husband of Rena Marrow, formerly known as Sable. Midway through the match, a large gift-wrapped refrigerator box with a bright red bow on it was wheeled halfway down the wooden ramp that led from the entrance area to the ring. I would, in my 3 years with WCW, go on to execute many painful moves on this wooden ramp, which was used for all the big shows. I was nervous as hell inside that box and kept saying prayers for my son, who was at this point 4 months in utero. When the time was right, I burst from the box. I knew a blew right past Bad and assaulted Sting. Sting fell to the outside, and while he lay prone on the blue mats, I ascended to the second turnbuckle. The announcer's table from which Jim Ross and Tony Schiavone were calling the match was directly in front of me, so I knew I had to get quite a bit of distance just to clear it. With as much spring as I could muster in my "this white man really can't jump" legs, I took flight and in a clip that would be shown hundreds of times over the next few years, dropped the most perfect elbow of my career. It looked like it killed Sting, and I'm sure at the time it probably felt like it, but the important thing was it made for great television. Sting was helped to the back, and there was a new sheriff in town. His name was Spaceman Frank Hickey. No, I'm sorry, it was Cactus Jack. Later in the show, I was set to give my first live interview. As they were counting us down, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, Paul E. Dangerously, who was conducting the interview, turned to me and said, Who would have thought? Two homeboys from New York, live on national television. Paul Lee handed me the mic, and in my big live debut, I sucked. Well, actually, it wasn't that bad, but the angle that followed it was tremendous. While I was talking, another gift-wrapped refrigerator box, hey, I don't know where they kept coming from, was rolled into the ramp. I assumed it was my business partner and close personal friend, Abdullah the Butcher. I think I'll give Abdullah a big Cactus Jack hug. In addition to being a great kisser, I'm also quite a hugger. That's a good idea, said Paulie. Give Abdullah a big Cactus Jack hug. Now when I hugged the box, it wasn't my big black butcher buddy who appeared, but a fired-up Sting, who apparently possessed remarkable healing powers because only 20 minutes earlier his career had been called over. After a few punches, the Stinger grabbed me and in a shocking move hip-tossed me off the 5-foot-high ramp to the cold, hard concrete below. This was a brutal move and was especially shocking in a time period when the cold, hard concrete gimmick was mine, mine, all mine. Try taking a piece of raw liver out of your refrigerator and place it on your kitchen counter. Good. Now push it off the table and listen to it hit the kitchen floor. Good. Did you hear that sound? That's what my 287 pounds sounded like when it hit the cold, hard concrete. But did I stay down? As Steve Austin would say, oh hell no. I got up and hit the Stinger with a garbage can, then emptied the contents on him before brawling through the curtain. Arn Anderson, after seeing the melee, offered his opinion in his patented style. I know one thing. If I threw someone off the ramp like that and he got up, I'd run. When we got to the back, Sting looked at me and said simply, You're great. It was definitely a big night for me. I had a 6-figure income, and the Stinger thought I was great. For some reason, WCW kept me off the road for a month after this angle. Hey, we wouldn't want to actually draw fans, would we? I couldn't understand it, but I had a $3,000 a week coming in to comfort me. In the meantime, however, Abdullah and I were getting over like $1 million on TV. Our interviews were becoming a much anticipated and enjoyed part of the shows. Abby didn't talk, but his mannerisms and facial expressions were tremendous. Dusty loved Bang Bang and encouraged me to use it in every promo. It was his idea to throw a birthday party for Sting, which turned out to be one of my favorite segments of the year. Paul E. hosted the interview in which Abdullah and I emerged with a pink cake that read Happy Birthday Sting, and no, believe it or not, it didn't end up in anybody's face. I began by singing to Sting in my deranged warble. Happy birthday to you, bang bang! Happy birthday to you, bang bang! I looked at the crowd. They weren't laughing. Some of them actually looked scared. With the song over, Abdullah started eating up the cake until Paulie cuts in. That's really nice, but it's not the guy's birthday. I know that, I shot back. Don't you think I know that? But I wasn't at Sting's last birthday. I wish I had been at Sting's last birthday, but it's really important that we celebrate it now. I continued, my voice gathering volume and my eyes locking on Paul E. Because Sting's last birthday was Sting's last birthday. Bang, 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 bang. Somehow he had come into center stage theater with a birthday cake and a children's song and managed to leave it bigger, better, and badder heels. Abdullah was always an adventure to team up with. Some guys like to plan lots of moves and then perform them like a dance in the ring. Abdullah was the exact opposite. You didn't plan anything with Abdullah because, one, he didn't like it that way, and two, he wouldn't remember anyway. So for the next several months, for the most part, we wrestled Sting, and Steiner, or a three-man team consisting of Sting, Steiner, and someone else. It was like a theater of the bizarre, and sometimes it worked out well, such as at the Omni in Atlanta, where a tag match in a cage had the fans rocking in the aisles. And sometimes it worked out badly, such as in Lakeland, Florida in December 1991. Abby and I versus Sting and Steiner was the evening's main event. I locked up with Steiner, and out of the corner of my eye, we could see Abby fumbling around in his pockets for a foreign object. Abby always came to the ring with an assortment of things to use, a fork being his perennial favorite. He kind of reminded me of the kid in Old Yeller emptying his pockets and having a frog jump out of them. Except Abby was about 50 years older than the kid, and 350 pounds heavier, and black, and with huge divots in his head. Anyway, I brought Steiner to our corner, and Abby was still fumbling with his pockets. We went back to the center of the ring. I tried bringing him to our corner a second time, and again Abby wasn't ready. Suddenly, Steiner darted behind me and, with about as much care as an airport baggage handler throwing a piece of baggage or luggage off a plane, launched me high overhead with a belly to back suplex. I landed high on the top of my head to the point where I ended the move lying on my stomach with my feet lying on the bottom rope. Why would you do that to the guy? Asked Sting later in the dressing room. I mean, the guy has beaten himself up trying to get me over, and you nearly killed him. I thought he was going to try to take advantage of me, Steiner replied. Now, I'm not a liberty taker inside the ring. I'm rough, and much of what I do is quite painful to be on the receiving end of, but I have too much respect for my opponents to try to take something on them. And if I ever decide to start, Rick Steiner definitely won't be the guy I do it to. I mean, I'm not that deranged, nor do I really love pain, no matter what you've been told over the last 15 years. The next evening, Terry Taylor walked up to me in the dressing room. He probably was spouting one of his Terry Taylorisms, such as, two questions. Who's your favorite wrestler, and why am I? Terry was a funny and charming guy to the point where even my mother-in-law had a tiny crush on him. That evening, however, Terry's humor and charms were falling on deaf ears, literally. A few minutes later, I could barely hear Grizzly Smith, a weathered agent who was also the father of wrestlers Sam Houston and Jake Roberts, speak to me, and it felt as if the conversations were taking place underwater. Grizz looked into my eyes, the pupils of which were about the size of pinpoints, and said more words than I had trouble hearing. Son, I think you've got yourself a concussion. We finished our swing in Florida with the other wrestlers ordered not to hit me in the head. When we got back to Atlanta, I had my first, but definitely not my last, CAT scan, and I'll be damned if the old wizened Grizzly Smith wasn't right. I had a concussion. I've only had 8 documented concussions in my career, with documented being the key word, as I've had my bell rung so many times that I'll probably have to rank high on the all-time list of brain swelling injuries. Chapter 14. In addition to all this wrestling success, things were really shaping up for us as a family. We finally had a little financial security and were able to buy some nice things to welcome our impending newborn into the world. I even bought a new car, a '92 Ford Crown Victoria that I still have today. It's a piece of crap now, but hey, there's a lot of history inside that car. For the Christmas holidays, Colette and I drove back from Atlanta where we'd been renting an apartment. Colette ended up staying with my parents for the remainder of her pregnancy while I hit the road to seek even greater fame and fortune. In addition to my fame and fortune, something else was growing at the same time. Me. Some husbands put on sympathy weight during their wives' pregnancy. Being a sensitive guy, I couldn't bear to make Colette feel bad about herself as her former model waist gave way to a huge basketball underneath her shirt. In addition, I suffered the double whammy of picking up Abdullah weight on the road. Let's get some ice cream, champ, was one of Abdi's favorite sayings as we sped onward into 1992 in our rented Cadillac. This was at a time when WCW picked up the tab on our rentals. When that ended, so did the caddies. Even today, as World Wrestling Federation superstar, I am much more likely to be speeding onward in a rented Lamina. I was gaining a reputation at this time as a guy who could work with anyone. In addition to being able to have a good match with pros like Bobby Eaton and Ricky Steamboat, I was able to pull out some decent ones from guys that didn't exactly set the world on fire. One of these guys was a big muscular kid named Van Hammer. Hammer had two things working against him. One, he was given a push well before he was ready for it, and two, he was given the gimmick of a heavy metal guitar player even though he couldn't play a lick. It reminded me of when I carried a bullwhip out to the ring with me in Memphis. If you don't crack it, people know you don't have a clue. So if a guy walks to the ring with a guitar and never plays it, well, I think you get the picture. Hammer was also a natural heat getter with the boys. He didn't mean to. He was actually a nice guy, but he had a tendency to bury himself with his ways. Statements like, "I came here to save the company," didn't sit well with guys who'd busted their asses for years and didn't have their own $25,000 music video. The first time I saw Hammer, he came striding down the ramp in preparation for his debut on a Clash of the Champions, the Albany Clash. He was wearing no shirt and was all oiled up to showcase his chiseled physique and was wearing a pair of tight black bicycle shorts that showcased his, well, never mind. Let's just say I could tell what religion he was before ever saying hello. As a result, most guys didn't care to help him out or even have a decent match with him. I, on the other hand, saw him as a challenge, like a piece of clay that I could mold. Instead of looking at his faults, I chose to look at his strengths, which were he was an exceptional natural athlete and he was willing to do whatever I wanted. And I wanted to do a lot. We had a match in Topeka, Kansas that people talked about for years, a falls count anywhere inside or outside the building. The outcome of this match was somewhat in jeopardy when I had a short meeting with Dusty. I tried to stroke his ego by telling him that I felt that a falls count anywhere was my specialty match, the same way that the leather strap match had been his. I even added that I potentially thought I could have a hell of a match of this type with his son Dustin, which we later did. The Dream thought about it for a few seconds, and in his unique Desi lisp, "Hey, where are all my Booker's lispers? That's it, baby. You'll be known as the king of the Fall Count Anywhere match. You can take it all over the country." I must admit, I doubted his sincerity, but I'll be damned if we got to Topeka and things hadn't been reconsidered. Nowadays, these Falls Count Anywhere matches are usually called hardcore matches, and it's commonplace for wrestlers to fight outside the building, and in Al Snow and Bob Holly's case, even into the Mississippi River. But in early 1992, our fight into the rodeo arena outside the Topeka Coliseum was considered unique. We fought all over the arena, and I even debuted one of the downright dumbest moves of my career, the sunset flip off the second turnbuckle on the concrete floor. In this move, I launched myself off the second turnbuckle and in midair flip upside down while hooking my opponent's waist on the way over. This theoretically leads to a pinning predicament, but with all my new 300 plus pounds landing squarely on my lower back and butt, almost led to a hospital predicament. "Holy shit," screamed referee Nick Patrick, who was a second generation wrestler, had just about seen it all. "I've never seen anything like that." We ended up fighting outside the building, and we spilled across the parking lot to the rodeo arena that actually had bulls brought in to add to the spectacle. Out of nowhere, a 400-pound black cowboy appeared and attempted to hit me with a scoop shovel. I instead maneuvered Hammer into the shovel's path, and the shovel made a nice solid bonk off the back of his head and neck. I punched the cowboy, knocking off his hat, and I'll be damned if that 400-pound black cowboy didn't turn out to be Abdullah. I covered Hammer and gained the pinfall right next to a pile of dried up horse manure. But the battle wasn't over yet. Abby and I continued the assault in the radio arena, where Missy Hyatt was on special hazard duty as an on the scene reporter. Earlier in the day, Desi had pulled me and Abby aside and whispered, "I didn't say this, but I want the girl to end up in the water." And wouldn't you know it, in the freakiest of freak accidents, Missy Hyatt ended up taking an 18-degree bath in a horse trough. The next day, Kip Fry, who had earlier in the week replaced Jim Herd as president of WCW, awarded Hammer and me a $5,000 bonus to be split between us. This was a Kip Fry policy. He gave $5,000 to the most valuable performer on all the big shows. Out of respect, we also cut Abdullah and Nick Patrick in for a share of the profits. Kip Fry was almost the exact opposite of Jim Herd. Whereas Herd was gruff, Fry was polite to a fault. Also, whereas Herd tended to be tight with a dollar, someone in the Turner organization must have authorized a budget increase because Fry started throwing money around. It was almost as if Kip was walking around looking for acceptance from the wrestlers, and he decided the best way to do it was by signing them to big contracts. Hell, the Freebirds were given $50,000 raises and then were taken off the road for 6 months. Kip was also like a kid when it came to appearing on television. After his first appearance on the tube, he sprinted to the back and picked up the phone. "Did you see me? Did you see me?" he inquired anxiously as I wondered what qualifications were required to run a multi-million-dollar wrestling company. On the way to the matches one day, Diamond Dallas Page was singing Fry's praises. Good thing about Kip, said WCW, is that he's willing to listen to the wrestlers. Kevin Nash thought about it and countered. The good thing about Kip is he's sexy in a shy kind of way. Nash was the king of ridiculous observations. At 7 feet tall, he may well be the country's tallest stand up comic, which in reality is how he finally became a star some years later. He may well have been the worst wrestler in the business at one point. The Nash versus Kazmaier battles still make me shudder, but he was always willing to learn, and because he was so well liked, the guys were always willing to help out. On one road trip, I talked to Kevin for 2 straight hours about using his size to be a dominant force instead of the Vinny Vegas comedy lounge wrestler that he was being portrayed as. A short time later, he left WCW for the World Wrestling Federation, and I saw him specifically doing some of the things I had talked about. I was very proud. DDP was a classic. A former nightclub manager and walking cartoon character, he had gotten his start as a manager for Vern Gagne's American Wrestling Association. His main attribute at that time was that he was willing to pay his own airfare to television tapings, along with paying for his two diamond girls, and work for free. He had eventually caught on in his home state of Florida as an announcer, where he hooked up with Dusty Rhodes, and the dream brought him on board when he took over the book for WCW. Page was eventually replaced as an announcer, even as one of his best friends. I've got to admit that his bag of play-by-play cliches was about as well received as a set of fingernails on a chalkboard. As a manager, he had been, at best, average. He had been relieved of his duties as a manager of the Freebirds, probably because his style was almost a duplicate of Michael Hayes, who was already out of the Birds. So DDP, at the tender age of 35, decided to step into the ring and become a wrestler, where, against all odds, he became a top name in the business. It certainly wasn't easy. Most people didn't want to see him succeed. Amid all the negativity, I remember one person predicting big things from him. I was riding in the rental car shuttle bus with Abby when I saw DDP strutting across the parking lot with one of his tacky outfits and some outrageous pair of shades. He's gonna make it, champ, I heard the butcher say. Dallas? I asked with shock in my voice, wondering if years of headshots and cage matches had finally taken their toll on my partner. Why? He lives his gimmick, champ, was Abby's reply. He lives his gimmick. Indeed, he did. He used the same tired cliches in real life that he did on TV. How are you doing? A lady would ask as we waited for change at her toll booth. Lady, DDP would start. If I was doing any better, I'd have to be twins just to handle it. I tended to roll my eyes a lot when I traveled with Dallas. His first match in Baltimore, sometime in the spring of 1992, was a classic, or at least the circumstances surrounding it were. I watched the whole thing, and to be honest, it wasn't all bad for a beginner. A few minutes after the match, I saw Dallas, and he was visibly upset. Hey, I said, putting my arm around him, it wasn't that bad. I then proceeded to compliment some of his work and hopefully offer hints on how he might improve it. Thanks, Jackie, he said. He always called me Jackie. I appreciate it. I felt like I had helped a little, but even when I left, his eyes were still red from crying. Later, Steve Austin asked me if I'd heard about Dallas and Chip, who had been one of his opponents that night. As it turned out, Dallas wasn't upset about the match at all. He was upset about the fistfight that had occurred in the dressing room afterward. Apparently, Firebreaker Chip, part of the Little Miss team of the Patriots, had been taken exception to some of the match and, being pumped up, had gotten in DDP's face about it. Now, this may have been Page's first match, but he'd been part of the business for 5 years and he wasn't about to back down. Somewhere in the argument, Chip threw a punch and the fight broke out. The scuffle ended when DDP hooked Chip in a front facelock, a simple but effective submission hold that in real life is a finisher in almost any fight. Dallas had to be pulled off Chip and then walked outside the dressing room, which is where I consoled him. I don't know, maybe you can't blame Chip, the real life Curtis Thompson. After all, the Patriots idea was one of the lowest in a long list of WCW lame ideas. Does anyone else remember the Ding Dongs? Maybe if I'd given the gimmick of a firebreaker who walked around giving fire tips, I might have been a little chip on my shoulder, too. I'd got a couple of favorite DDP stories. The first one centered around Dallas' return to his old stomping grounds of Fort Myers, Florida. I was traveling with Paige and Scotty Flamingo, later known as Raven, on the loop through Florida, and was forced to endure story over story about how over Paige was in Fort Myers. Behind his back, we dismissed DDP's claims. Nobody can be as popular as Paige claims he is, we'd scoff. When we got to Fort Myers, we began to doubt our thoughts. Every paper had a story about DDP. Man, Page was pumped too. He was going to return to Fort Myers a hero, and brother, he was going to tear the house down. Well, it didn't work out quite that way. Dallas' opponent that night was the returning Curtis Hughes. Hughes, at 300 pounds, was a hell of a performer. On returning, he looked to be about 380 and was now known as Big Cat Curtis Hughes. Now, if I was wrestling a guy in his hometown, I would make extra sure to have my flying shoes on and would go out of my way to make the guy look good in front of his fans and family. Unfortunately, too many guys had gotten in Hughes' ear and convinced him that he was too big to bump, especially for a beginning guy like Page. What followed was 10 of the worst minutes of wrestling I'd ever seen, with Page throwing everything with the kitchen sink at Hughes and the Big Cat standing still like the Rock of Gibraltar. To make matters worse, Kevin Nash was late hitting the ring and failed to break up a pin attempt that would have led to a disqualification. Instead, Page lay on his back waiting in vain for a save that didn't arrive, while the referee counted 1, 2, 3. The legendary Diamond Dallas Page had just done the JOB in his own hometown. He was crushed, almost to the point of tears. He was so upset that he didn't even want to go out to the nightclub he used to run, even though he'd set up a deal where the boys could eat and drink all night for free. Eventually, we convinced him, and we headed out for a night on the town at Norma Jean's, where, to tell you the truth, Dallas wasn't as popular as he'd claimed. In truth, he was even more popular. He was the man. Girls everywhere wanted to talk to him. Guys gathered close just to be around him. Dallas even started to smile, and he was returning to his normal state of overbearing stories and worn-out cliches when, out of the corner of his eye, he saw him. As if burying DDP's hopes and dreams in his own hometown wasn't enough, Big Cat Curtis Hughes had showed up to eat Dallas' free food and to drink his free beer. Hughes later resurfaced a few times in the World Wrestling Federation. On his second run, a short-lived stint in the early 1997, he was brought in as Hunter Hearst Helmsley's butler. After one show, Hughes had to be hospitalized. While he was laid up, Hughes' duties were taken over by Hunter's first choice, a muscular female wrestler named Chyna. My other favorite DDP story occurred somewhere in the Carolinas in the middle of 1993. I was traveling with DDP and stunning, not quite stone cold yet, Steve Austin, and we were in the second day of a week-long loop. Now, you've got to understand, despite all the cartoonish characteristics, Dallas was a very intense individual. So intense, in fact, that he used to ask us to videotape his match every night. He'd then study those damn things for hours, looking to improve in any ways he could. Often, Steve and I would goof on Page by supplying color commentary during the matches. Dallas jokes now that he could get a fortune for these homemade videos, with Stone Cold and Mankind making the calls. Because of his intensity, Dallas was easy to rile up on a road trip. On the first day of this particular trip, Steve and I made a little bet. How quick do you think we can crack Page? I asked, looking forward to this somewhat cruel pleasure. 3 days, replied Austin, looking forward to the challenge. 3 was good, but I had just a little bit more faith. We can crack him in 2 days, I stated solemnly, giving Austin my best Jack Lord Bookham Dan-O look. The race was on. My first day started with a quality shot. Austin fired it. My wife wanted me to pick up a couple of antiques on this trip, Steve innocently said. What did you tell her? Page responded. I told her I'd already picked up DDP at the airport, Austin said, laughing. Man, an age joke, an especially sensitive subject for the man who claimed he'd never had a bad day in his life. The verbal blow was a good one, but the aging Page shrugged it off. By day 2, however, he wasn't shrugging anything off. He was downright cranky. We checked into a hotel after the evening show, and a still sweaty Dallas was looking forward to a hot shower. He stormed out of the bathroom, angry that no towels had been left for us. He called immediately and demanded that housekeeping bring some on the double. The towels arrived while DDP was down in the hall getting ice for his many nagging injuries. The guy strapped so many ice packs to his body that I often suggested he just buy a huge cooler and lie in it. Steve and I looked at each other. Page was on the verge of cracking. We couldn't let up now. Thinking quickly, Austin hid all the towels except 2 under a bed. When Page inquired about the status of the towels, I informed him that the towels had indeed come and that housekeeping had left them in the bathroom. No sooner had Page walked into the John when he came storming out. This is what they brought us, he screamed, holding aloft one hand towel and a washcloth for Steve and me to see. God damn it, I'm going to get them myself. The moment Page walked out, Steve reached under the bed and pulled out about 8 plush bath towels that he had placed directly on the TV so that it would be the first thing Page appeared upon his re-entry to the room. What a maroon, I said in my best Bugs Bunny impression. He's just about done. Dallas finally did take his shower, and he emerged from the bathroom in typical fashion, buck naked except for an ice pack on his shoulder and saran wrap around his knees that he claimed kept the joints loose. He then began his pre-sleep ritual that included thumbtacking the blinds to the wall so as not to allow even the faintest ray of sunshine into the room in the morning, God bless. I found the whole nude thing a little uncomfortable, to tell you the truth. Usually the only guys who walked around naked were the midgets who seemed proud of what some people call God's practical joke, and guys like Scorpio, who was kind of like a genitalactic freak of nature. DDP was more or less a normal white guy. Hey, I'm no pecker checker, but with Page's protruding Peter bouncing around, it was hard not to notice. The guy's penis was everywhere. Poor Page turned the lights off and settled into his bed for a long, comfortable nap. Little did he know that his evening wasn't quite over. Earlier, Fan had given us a whole bunch of chocolate chip cookies that she had baked. While Dallas showered, Steve and I dumped approximately 36 soft, chewy beauties between the sheets of DDP's bed, and now as he lay there, I could tell that those delicate, delicious toll houses were starting to take effect. It started with a little wriggle, and then grew to the point where he knew something was wrong. What's this? Dallas said, to no one in particular. Steve and I remained silent. Suddenly it hit him. There's fucking cookies in my bed, he yelled. Someone put fucking cookies in my bed. Silence. Dallas was now screaming at the top of his lungs. I want to know who put fucking cookies in my bed right now. I soon gave myself away. I was laughing so hard under my covers that I couldn't help myself. By holding in this laugh, my stomach was rising up and down rapidly, and Dallas detected the quick in and out breathing from my nostrils. You! He yelled, and jumped from his bed, turning on the light and throwing back the covers to reveal a plethora of crumbs, chunks, and chips that a helpful fan had hoped would be eaten by three of her favorite sports entertainers. Instead, in an ironic twist, her baking bid had backfired. Instead of being eaten, these innocent cookies had eaten up the livid Paige, who was now hell bent on vengeance. Dallas lunged for me and threw back the sheets. Unlike the naked Paige, I was attired in fruit of the looms. He then gathered as many of the broken pieces as he could carry and threw them on top of me. It wasn't enough. He wanted to make sure the cookies would torture me and ruin my sleep, the way that I had ruined his. He sat on me and began jumping, trying to grind the offending cookies into my body as I listened to the strange symphony of bouncing bed springs and crackling saran wrap. There, he yelled. How do you like it? How do you like fucking cookies in your bed? He waited for my reply. Well, I started. It's not the cookies that I mind, it's the fact that you're rubbing your naked ass all over me. DDP got up slowly. He was a defeated man. He went back to his bed and swept away the remaining cookie parts. He turned off the light and lay back down. After a minute, he spoke quietly, sadly. Guys, he began, I think I'm going to get my own room tomorrow. Chapter 15. On February 20th, 1992, I became a father. Dewey Francis Foley was born in Massapequa, New York, after a month of readjusting from his trip through the womb. We packed up our car and two dogs and headed for Atlanta and the house on Lake Lanier that I had just rented. The house turned out to be a real hassle, because as charming as it was to live on the lake, the house was more accurately a cottage. It was musty without enough room, and you actually had to walk outside to get from our bedroom to the rest of the house. We did have plenty of fun, however, as we would dive off our dock and swim with the dogs, while little Dewey looked on from his infant seat. We had two Shetland sheepdogs, or Shelties, one that Colette had gotten in 1981 named Confusion, and another that we'd gotten a year ago as a practice baby named Fuzzy. From Confusion to Fuzzy in 10 years, my wife had certainly changed. Confusion's not with us anymore, but we've got a big goofy black lab named Delilah and two guinea pigs named Alan and Ruby to keep us busy. At about 2 months of age, Dewey came down with an illness that doctors couldn't detect. Several of them told us there was nothing wrong, but still a persistent cough continued to worry us. One night when we were in the car returning from a trip, Dewey was coughing so hard that I really thought we were going to lose him. He was whooping and gasping, and we were completely unable to help him. I began speeding for the nearest hospital. It was 2 a.m. and the highway was empty, so I gathered some speed, up to about 75 in a 65-mile-per-hour zone. I saw the red lights of a North Carolina state trooper, and I slowed down to explain the dire situation. Can you believe it? The son of a bitch actually wrote us a ticket. I was so damn mad that I blatantly cursed out an officer of the law. Now I have respect for the law. Hell, I even carried a photo of Hawaii Five-O's Steve McGarrett in my wallet with me for years, but this guy was a disgrace and a prick. I didn't pay the ticket out of principle and ended up having my license suspended over it. Sometimes it just doesn't pay to make a stand. Dewey would later be alright, but not before giving the cough to me. The coughing started affecting my matches. I could wrestle for about a minute before an attack would set in. The coughing would lead to dry heaving, and I would have to bail out of the ring to try to regain my composure. One night in Perry, Georgia, the situation got ugly. I was wrestling Ron Simmons, a true football legend and one of the great storytellers in the business. Ron, who had grown up in nearby Warner Robins, Georgia, was an intense performer, and he was particularly looking forward to his hometown crowd. A few minutes into the match, Simmons shot me into the ropes and caught me with a move called the Spine Buster. This was legitimately a pretty tough move to take because the impact is so sudden and violent on the back, but it was even rougher when the powerful former Heisman Trophy candidate did it. In spite of the impact, it was a move that I thought I took well. Some guys instinctively put down their hands or elbows to try to block the pump, and others hold on for dear life and make it look like crap, but I was always took it clean and quick. Bam! It was an impressive sight. 2 months earlier, I had even taken the move from Ron in a pay-per-view match on the wooden ramp, prompting another great Jim Ross call. That's a wooden ramp, folks! Please don't sit at home saying, well, he knows how to fall. Something went wrong on that night in Perry. I took the bump and couldn't breathe. I got up and stood, started filling my mouth, spilling from my insides. Simmons was in the corner in a three-point stance, ready to hit me with a football-style tackle aimed at my knees. I tried to tell him I was hurt, but when I opened my mouth, the only thing that came out was blood. Ron charged at me for the tackle. Ordinarily, I would cut a flip upon impact, a move that did two things. One, it looked good, and two, lessened the risk of knee injury. Instead, I went down like a wounded deer. Simmons looked confused, but he went to the corner and got down in his stance. Again, I tried to speak, and again it oozed blood out instead. Simmons hit me again, and again I fell like a sack of shit. Mercifully, he pinned me. I walked back to the dressing room, worried that my career was over. Every 4 or 5 steps, I stopped to empty my mouth of the red stuff. Over the years, I've bled so damn much that I can't help making a few observations about this liquid that courses through our veins. I've seen it spill out of my meat like water, and I've seen it so thick that my face looked like a coagulated mask of plasmic jello. I've seen it look like black ink running down my arm, and I had seen my bathtub almost black when I rinsed my blood-soaked clothing in it. My wife used to joke about the Norman Bates shower I would take after a match where the juice had been flowing. This night in Perry, however, was the brightest red blood I had ever seen. I think internal blood is always brighter for some reason. When I think back to the gob of internal blood that I spat on the floor of the Dallas Sportatorium in '89, it seems that it was noticeably brighter than its head wound cousins. It was almost fluorescent. Grizzly Smith was there to size up the situation. Cactus, he said softly, I believe we'd better get you to a hospital. Thus began a series of tests and probes and barium swallows that yielded no further insight into what the hell was wrong with me. A couple of nights later, I was wrestling Barry Windham, and after about a minute, the coughing and dry heaves began. We finished the match, but upon returning to the dressing room, I was told that Windham said that guy shouldn't be in the ring. This condition did lead to a somewhat humorous situation in Baltimore, however. I was teaming up with Paul E. and Bobby Eaton against the Steiners in a 4.5 man tag bout. I guess Paul was considered half a man. We went about a minute, and Scott threw me around in his usual sensitive style. I started to cough. Then I started to dry heave. Bobby Eaton may have, other than Gerald Briscoe, one of Vince McMahon's famed stooges, along with Pat Patterson, the weakest stomach I've ever seen. Bobby took one look at me and started to heave too. It was a pretty pathetic sight, as these two despicable heels stood in center ring taking turns attempting to throw up. It was at about this time that Kip Fry stepped down as president of WCW. His replacement was the legendary Bill Watts. I've written a little bit about Bill Watts before. To do him justice, it either requires a lot more writing. The cowboy was either loved or hated, depending on whom you talked to. Jim Ross loved the guy. So did Skander Akbar, my old Devastation Incorporated boss. Grizzly Smith rubbed his hands in anticipation upon hearing the news. The cowboy, he said, is going to turn this place around. Watts was revered by many for the success and excitement of his old Mid-South wrestling group. At the time, he sold it to Jim Crockett, whose NWA, National Wrestling Alliance, would in turn be sold to Ted Turner to become WCW. Watts' television show, renamed UWF, was the best in the country. He was the forerunner of episodic cliffhanging wrestling, and his music videos and editing were state of the art. The World Wrestling Federation later went on to perfect these same qualities, making Monday night's Raw is War the hottest show on cable TV. Unlike the Federation, though, Watts didn't portray his show as sports entertainment or his performers as entertainers. He ran a wrestling show, damn it, and his guys were wrestlers. If you respected the business, like I did, it was easy to see why people loved him. It was just as easy to see why people hated him. They thought he was a bully and a tyrant and a dinosaur and a cheapskate. Let me put the emphasis for now on cheapskate. Almost immediately, Watts began cutting costs. On his first day, he did away with the catered meals at television tapings. Forget that we were often at the building for 10 hours on TV days. Bring your own food or starve. Away from went the coffee at all house shows. Take that, all you caffeine addicts. But more important, down with the contracts. Guys who were negotiating with Kip Fry for large raises were screwed. Terry Taylor went from looking at $100,000 raise to looking for a job. Arn Anderson had his contract cut in half, and several other guys were put on nightly deals. Watts must have loved me, though. Thankfully, he re-signed me at exactly the same money I had made the year before. Watts even made a special call to my house to see how I was feeling during my coughing illness. The cowboy concluded his call to me with these thoughtful words. God damn it, Jack. Take care of yourself. You're a goddamn crazy son of a bitch, and you have no regard for your body, and I gotta tell you, I get off on that. I'm damn near tears now as I write this, thinking about the compassion in his voice. Once on a Clash of the Champions, Scorpio caught me with a kick and I went down. Apparently, Bill didn't think it had looked good, and he let me have it when I got in the dressing room. Sorry, Bill, I said. I thought he caught me pretty good. Damn it, Jack, Watts shot back as I waited for the verbal assault. It never came. Instead, he put his hand on my shoulder and said, Damn it, Jack, that's okay. I know you're trying your best. It was almost like I was the teacher's pet. Now wait, don't think I'm going to go easy on the cowboy just because he wasn't too bad to me, because I'm not. Bill Watts had some of the most dated, useless ideas and senseless rules that I'd ever heard. In a meeting one day at Center Stage, he let us have it. Within 1 hour, Bill completely changed not only our professional lives, but our personal lives as well. Let's call them Bill's 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not jump off the top rope. Thou shalt not play cards in the dressing room. Thou shalt not land on protective mats outside the ring. Thou shalt not bring your children into the locker room. Thou shalt not bring wives to the television tapings. Thou shalt not use sleeper holes. Heels shall not travel with baby faces. Thou shalt not talk to each other outside of the arena. Thou shalt not stay in the same hotel together. Thou shalt not train in the same gym together. And the biggest commandment of them all, thou shalt not leave the building until the final bell of the final match. The last one was the one that angered the boys the most. Nikita Koloff questioned this commandment at a meeting a short time later. Bill addressed the boys and then asked if there were any questions. Koloff raised his hand and made on a plea for sanity. Yeah, Bill, I know that it's important for the guys to stay until the end, but sometimes when we've been away from our families for a few weeks, we might have a chance to catch a night flight home. Do you think in those situations we might be able to get out a little earlier? Bill thought about it for about half a second, and then went on with all the warmth and sensitivity of an IRS auditor, shot forth, yeah, it's a tough business on families. Any more questions? Okay, let's go. The whole staying till the end resulted in one really humorous situation. We were wrestling in a minor league baseball stadium in Charlotte, North Carolina, on the last day of a 10-day tour. A lot of the boys still lived in Charlotte, dating back to the days that Jim Crockett ran the NWA out of Charlotte. Most of the boys now lived in Atlanta, which was only a 4 hour drive. Either way, everyone was going to get home, but not until the final bell of the final match. I wrestled Ricky Steamboat in the third match of the night, but had to wait until the end. Steamboat lived in Charlotte, and he couldn't go home. And remember, in honor of the fourth commandment, his son wasn't allowed in the dressing room. Vader and Sting were in this evening's main event. As the match started, all the wrestlers got into the cars and lined up single file, pointing toward the exit. As the match was winding down, we all started our engines. At the finish, the boys all made their move, and before the referee even counted the 3 count, we turned the Charlotte Baseball Stadium into the Charlotte Motor Speedway. I don't know why Bill loved to keep the guys on the road worn out and miserable. I think he found it romantic. About this time, my health started to improve. It turned out that both Dewey and I were diagnosed with whooping cough. Pertussis is its technical name, was something that I thought was extinct, but it turned out that we both caught this very rare condition. Dewey improved before I did, and I slowly came around, finally feeling better right before one of the biggest matches of my life, a Falls Count Anywhere against Sting at the June 1992 Bash at the Beach Blast. Sorry. The match took place at the Mobile Civic Center. Not what most would call a tropical paradise, and in truth, we were several miles from water. I had trained hard for this match, and in doing so, I had lost most of my Abdullah weight. Sadly, Abby had quit the company shortly after Watts arrived. Also, I had immersed myself in mental visualization for this match. I had seen it in my head 1,000 times. The match turned out even better than I'd hoped. The Stinger was up for it, as it had been a while since we'd wrestled against each other. The timing was on, the pacing was great, and some of the transitions were breathtaking. Even Ross and the new color man Jesse the Body Ventura were on top of their game. I lost the match, but didn't give a damn. As George Costanza might have said, baby, I'm back. Even Watts was happy. Gentlemen, he told us, it just doesn't get any better than that. For years, I considered that to be the greatest match of my career. Sting was genuinely flattered to hear me say that, and had occasionally asked me after other big matches, was mine still your favorite? I think he was actually saddened when he heard that another one replaced it. It was almost as if he were the queen in Snow White and the magic mirror broke the bad news. I couldn't stop thinking about that match all the way on the 400-mile drive home. I had the top down on my '84 Chrysler, and life was good. My health was good. I had just torn the roof off the Mobile Civic Center. I had a beautiful wife and son, and I was still making 6 effing figures a year. A month later, we bought our first house, a beautiful little Victorian with a wraparound porch in Ackworth, Georgia. Chapter 16. Despite all its faults, Bill did have a gift for exciting television. There was one taping in particular that showed me Watts' gift for creating great human drama. Now, Dusty was still the booker, but Watts was definitely in charge, and one of Bill's trademarks was creating a black baby face and building the company around him. When the Cowboys saw Ron Simmons, I think he heard cash registers ring. Rod had all the qualities that Watts loved. He was big, he was black, he could talk, he had a legitimate sports background, and he was a legitimate tough guy. Bill started the ball rolling by doing a great angle with Sting. I honestly can't remember all the details, but it culminated in the return of Jake the Snake Roberts as he appeared from the crowd and left the Stinger lying. This left Sting unable to wrestle Vader in the evening's main event. A lottery was held in the ring instead, with the winner to face Vader. Simmons won and later defeated that ear-tearing bastard to become the new WCW heavyweight champion. People were actually crying in the arena. They were so damn happy. I really thought the Cowboy had helped the company turn the corner. I'm often asked about my most painful injury. The answer usually surprises people. They ask about the ear in Germany, the barbed wire in Japan, and the fall off the cage at the 1998 King of the Ring. All worthy contenders. But the most painful injury I ever had was a torn abdominal muscle that I suffered against Ron Simmons at the September 1992 Clash of the Champions in Atlanta. I honestly couldn't claim to be the number one heel in the company anymore. Actually, I hadn't been in a long time. Rick Rude had come in about 10 months earlier, and he had become a hotter heel than I had ever been. Still, I was a valuable guy to have around, and when Simmons became champion, I drew the assignment of being his first challenger. I was flattered to draw the assignment, but I was puzzled by the promotion of the match. Watts had this idea that it was important to turn the Atlanta Omni into the Madison Square Garden of the South, and as such, spent an inordinate amount of time promoting that one building. On the Saturday before the clash, Ron Simmons had a little interview, but was instructed by Watts to concentrate on his upcoming Omni match with Rick Rude, which would be seen by a few thousand, instead of his clash match with me, which would be seen by millions. I always felt that this strategy made WCW look like a Bush League regional promotion instead of a national powerhouse. The Clash special was actually celebrating the 20th anniversary of wrestling on TBS. Ted Turner had always stayed loyal to his wrestling shows because his Georgia Championship Wrestling was one of the shows that kept his superstation afloat in the 1970s. Several celebrities were in attendance, and video tributes were played throughout the night to many of the stars who had wrestled on the station over the years. Inside center stage, I joked that there might very well be a new champion crowned. Arn Anderson overheard me and put me in my place with a classic Arnism. Jack, I don't care if that son of a bitch has a heart attack and dies, Arn began. You will roll him on top of you. The match had one thing working against it. Watts had brought in my old buddy Ole Anderson to be, of all things, a troubleshooting referee. You'd have thought that after all the years he had spent in the business, Ole would have absorbed through osmosis some understanding of what a referee does. He didn't seem to have a clue. He didn't know that a wrestler who rolls back into the ring and out again breaks up the 10 count. His mannerisms were stiff, and he counted pinfalls as if he were trying not to break a fingernail. Yeah, Ole was hurting our match all right, but we wanted to make up for it. Ron was throwing forearms as if he was trying to make his wrist go completely through my jawbone. I later told Ron that I could take as stiff a forearm as he wanted to give, but that he would have to keep them up over my ears, or else I wouldn't be able to chew for a week. You gotta understand that a world title around your waist puts a great deal of pressure on you. Pressure to perform, pressure to draw, and in this case, pressure to garner television ratings. The pressure took a naturally intense guy like Simmons and made him almost impossible to control. It was like holding a tiger by the tail. I finally stopped Big Ron and prepared to dive off the ring apron with the big elbow onto his prone body. Because there was no protective mats, he was on the cold, hard concrete floor. I landed on the concrete, and pain shot through my body, the likes of which I'd never felt before. I swear I thought I'd broken my pelvis. The pain was so bad I thought I was going to pass out. I couldn't understand it. It hadn't even been a real big leap, maybe 6 feet. But I dropped so many for so long that maybe it was just a matter of time before something gave out. Unfortunately, I still had a live, nationally televised match to continue. It would have been nice if Ron had beaten me with a simple roll up or a small package, painless finishing moves, but that wasn't quite his style. Instead, he shot me in the ropes and boom, spine buster. Not enough. Another Irish whip, another boom, power slam. 1, 2, 3, thank God it's over. It wasn't over, however. When I got to the back, Watts asked me to go out and contribute commentary to the next match between the team Barry Windham and Dustin Rhodes and my new stablemates, the Barbarian and Butch Reed. The videotape showed my face as almost completely white from the pain I was in, even though, to my surprise, I did a good job keeping up with Ross and Ventura on the commentary. At the end of Barb and Reed's victory, the camera showed Jake Roberts nodding his head in approval, as if he were the mastermind of the whole plan. That was the last and first time that our foursome was ever together. Butch Reed was fired a week later for missing a flight, and Jake left the next month. After the clash, I was taken directly to the hospital where I was x-rayed and examined and even for some strange reason given a rectal probe. When I received the diagnosis, I felt like the world's biggest wimp. No, said the doctor, it wasn't a broken pelvis or any break at all. I had torn a muscle in my lower abdomen. What? How the hell can something like that hurt so bad? I felt humiliated because I just didn't understand how devastating an injury like that could be. Hell, it was the same injury that forced Bill Goldberg out of football. Still, I got home at 2, woke up at 7, confident that I could wrestle that evening. I was wrong. I could barely walk and needed a wheelchair to get around the airport. In the afternoon, I bumped my toe on a crack in the sidewalk and almost cried. I got to the matches, and after taking one look at me, Grizzly Smith told me that I wouldn't be wrestling. I put up a very small protest, but I knew he was right. My streak was over. After 8.5 years in the business, I had missed a match because of injury. The next morning, I got an idea of how seriously I was hurt when I looked down and saw that my entire penis had turned black and blue. Unfortunately, even though my penis was now black, it remained the same size. While I was hurt, Cowboy Bill made me the Barbarian's manager. I've got to hand it to Bill. He kept me in the mix. The Barbarian was getting a shot at Simmons on the next pay-per-view, Halloween Havoc 1992, from Philadelphia. The main event of that show would be the ill-fated spin the wheel, make the deal match between Jake and Sting. To pump the pay-per-view, we shot a series of training clips showing the Barbarian to be impervious to pain, kind of like he is in real life. Jake and Sting shot a tremendous mini-movie that turned the show into a huge success, financially. It was WCW's highest-grossing pay-per-view for a long time. Artistically, it was a bust, with Jake and Sting being especially hard on the eyes. A couple of days later, Jake was gone. Jake was and still is one of the unique characters in the business. A strange mixture of a hell of a guy and Satan, Jake is a guy I both genuinely like and am troubled by. As a wrestler, he was one of the best, or at least until the Honky Tonk Man hit him so hard over the head with a guitar that it nearly crippled him. These days, Jeff Jarrett hits a guy with a cheap-ass guitar. The thing explodes upon impact, a cloud of smoke adds to the effect, and nobody gets hurt too bad. Back in 1987, Honky hit Jake with the best guitar money could buy. The whole thing that broke were Jake's vertebrae, and he went down in a heap, never to be quite the same man again. His psychology and interviews were among the best in the sport. Without ever raising his voice, he was able to spellbind the audience, and I was not the only one who felt like I was going to school when I was in his presence. On the other hand, he could be a devious SOB. He would often go out of his way to make other people look bad. He was known to take somebody's best shot and stand there daring him for more. Hell, he even did it to Muhammad Ali in the Superdome when Ali was a special guest there. This was back in Watt's old Mid South territory, and Bill had brought Ali in to be the corner of one of his big stars. When the time was right, Ali climbed up on the ring apron, and the heel sped the greatest for the big punch. Bam! Went Ali. Down went a wrestler. Bam! Went Ali, and down went another. Now it was Jake's turn. Bam! Went Ali, and Jake just stood there. Bam! Went Ali again, and Jake just once again refused to move, this time doing Ali's own shuffle and saying, come on, and trying to goad Ali into the ring. I wouldn't have wanted to be in his shoes when Watts got a hold of him, even though Jake's rationale was simple. Hey, he didn't have to get up and work here the next day. I did. Actually, it was a performance just like that one that changed the course of Kevin Nash's career. Nash took a look at Jake no-selling some punches, turned to me, and said, I know one thing. If Jake can get away with doing that with those skinny legs and that pot belly, then I sure as hell can do it too. Nash's improvement was immediate. I really got to know Jake a lot better than we traveled together in the World Wrestling Federation. Jake had become a born again Christian and had been preaching around the country. Upon his return to the Federation, Jake used the television exposure to continue preaching the Word of God. It was this preaching that led to the most infamous slogan and best selling t shirt in wrestling history. After defeating Jake at the 1996 King of the Ring, Steve Austin was interviewed and said of the Snake, You come out here, you talk about your Psalms, and you talk about your John 3:16. Austin 3:16 says, I just whooped your ass. The rest is history. I enjoyed traveling with Jake because he was funny as hell, had great road stories, had an encyclopedic knowledge of the business, and most important because I thought I was traveling with a man of God. Jake Roberts made me feel good about myself. Over time, however, chinks started appearing in Jake's religious armor. For one thing, he told his stories about the bad old days with just a little bit too much gusto, as if he wished those days weren't really over for good. Also, some of the things he did appeared to be not exactly divine. I was on a road trip from Jake, Ron Simmons, and Justin Bradshaw in the winter of '96. Jake was chugging down brews and felt the need to relieve himself. Pull over, slurred Jake, who promptly got out of the car and whizzed all over the tire of a parked car. When he re entered the vehicle, I questioned Jake's urinary decision by saying, Gee, Jake, do you imagine the Pope pulls over the Pope Mobile so he can pee on parked cars? It was not the only time that Jake's urine would play a part in my life. Jake opened the door to the Fairfield Inn late one night in Detroit. I don't want to jump to conclusions and say that Jake was drunk, but he was staggering and cursing, and he did smell like a strange mixture of barley, hops, and yeast. Later that night, actually in the wee hours of the morning, I awoke to a strange sound. The sound of water running, or more correctly, the sound of Jake pissing between our beds. What the hell are you doing? I yelled at Jake, who simply replied, before passing out in his bed. I lay there for a little while before the potent potpourri of Jake's farts, piss, and beer breath really started to bother me. I actually went down to the lobby and inquired about getting another room. The lady at the desk told me that if I checked in now, I'd have to pay for the whole night, but if I waited until 6 a.m., I would only pay for the day. I looked at the clock. It was 4:20 a.m. For the next hour and 40 minutes, I watched returns of Kung Fu and thought about what a great guy Jake was. When I woke up in the morning, I headed for the gym. Apparently, the evening news was already out, as Dennis Knight, or Midian, was there to greet me with his Dead on Mankind imitation. Excuse me, ma'am, he squealed to an imaginary hotel receptionist. I thought I'd specifically asked for a non-smoking, non-urine room. Eventually, the chinks in Jake's religious armor became huge dents and finally gaping holes. On a road trip from Boston to Newark, Jake was going into detail about his preaching experience. I was really moved. I asked Jake if he felt he got a lot out of doing this. Brother, Jake grinned in his best weathered Sam Elliott voice, $1,500 a shot plus gimmicks. Apparently, Jake misinterpreted my meaning of getting a lot out of it. Many of the guys liked to tease Jake about his religious gimmick. One night in Calgary, Paul Bear, my manager at the time, tore out a cartoon from Hustler magazine and taped it to Jake's locker. The cartoon depicted a Catholic priest walking up into an adult store and pointing to a blow-up sex doll dressed as an altar boy saying, I'll take 2 of those. Paul then wrote Jake's name on the cartoon and waited for Jake to arrive. When Jake did, his reaction was classic. He simply looked up at the sky and in a line right out of Luke 23:24 said, Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. What happened next truly shocked me as Jake healed 2 lepers, turned water into wine, made a blind man see, and upon leaving the room, walked across the water. Chapter 17. Guess who became a good guy? I've been getting cheered quite a bit anyway, and WCW was badly in need of a guy who fans could actually like. I was told by the company that they were happy with their number 1 guy, Sting, but that nobody else was even close. I knew I could be that guy, close to staying in position if not salary. I'd been with the company for a year and a half, and unless the fans were blind or stupid, it was pretty obvious that I'd been going above and beyond the call of duty for a long time. The idea to turn me was set in motion when Rick Rude became injured, and as a result would be unable to wrestle in the upcoming Clash's Tin Man Steel Cage main event. A match was set up in Montgomery, Alabama between me and Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. Orndorff had 5 years earlier been one of the biggest drawing cards in wrestling. His run with Hulk Hogan had set attendance records throughout the country, but in working in such a hectic schedule at such an intense pace, as was his style, he had come down with a serious nerve injury to his neck. Because the money on top with Hogan was so good, Orndorff never slowed down until he found himself one day unable to lift his arm. He left the sport for a few years, but had been on the independent scene for a while, and with great determination had built himself back up to tremendous physical condition. One arm was noticeably smaller than the other, but his determination was such that the smaller arm actually became the stronger of the two. It was the same determination that Orndorff brought to this match. Harley Race was the manager at ringside. He would be making the determination of who was tougher, the tougher man was. Paul and I had a real good match while Harley yelled encouragement from the outside. Harley's enthusiasm turned to aggression as he tried to roll me back in the ring to continue. I took exception and knocked Harley on his ass, a move that prompted Vader to come out and exact revenge. With my sweatpants halfway down my butt, the Mastodon splashed me twice and left me lying. I guess Paul Orndorff was judged the winner by process of elimination. In the locker room, I thought about my revenge. I was planning on coming through the crowd to attack Harley's new duo from behind while they cut an interview in the ring. Someone suggested using a shovel as a weapon, and I began practicing half-speed shovel shots on the wall. After all, this wasn't a class that Danucci had offered. I was scared that I might seriously hurt someone. This wasn't a plastic or even an aluminum shovel, it was solid steel. Harley saw me practicing these wimpy blows and came over to me. He pointed to Vader and with his withered, gravelly 30 years in the business voice said, "If you don't hit him, I'm going to come back here and hit you." He had put the fear of Harley in me. Harley was like that. He was an 8-time world champion who had overcome polio as a kid, and nobody was more respected. He was known both for his classic matches in his prime and his classic Kansas City barbecues in the present. One time in Baltimore, I had split my eyebrow right down to the bone on the guardrail outside the ring. The Maryland State Athletic Commission was required by law to pay for any injury that occurred inside the ring, but was not so required on injuries that occurred outside the ring. Back in the dressing room, Harley called over the doctor and said, he was split by a headbutt inside the ring. The doctor disagreed, saying, "Oh, come on now, Harley. I think it happened on the second rail, or on the guardrail." Harley waited about a second and answered back, this time in a much firmer tone. "I said it was a headbutt, and it happened inside the ring." I was brought to the hospital immediately. That doctor had the fear of Harley put into him, too. In the backstage area, I could see Vader, Orndorff, and Harley in the ring. I knew this was another big moment in my career, and I was nervous as hell. I kept thinking of my son's tiny blue and green shoes and repeating, "I love you, my little monster man." It's strange how often in this business I juxtapose beautiful images with brutal acts, and a brutal act was about to take place. I made my move and came through the crowd with my newfound steel friend. As I hit the ring, I could hear Vader deliver one of his standard lines, "I fear no man, and I feel no pain." I swung for the fences, and Vader sure as hell felt that pain. Whack! Ow! In an un-Vader like high-pitched shriek. Orndorff was next, and I swung for his head, although he helped cushion the blow with his hands. Harley even fed me for once, the tough old bastard. What happened next was spontaneous because the original plan had fallen through. About 5 of the underneath guys were going to come out as I continued my assault, but upon seeing how ugly it was getting, they literally ran away. Instead, Kevin Nash, Mark Canterbury, and Dennis Knight hit the ringside area where by now I was waiting. These guys were my friends, but I was running on adrenaline and fear of Harley, a very powerful fuel. There were 6 hits, 3 shovel hits, and 3 guys hitting the floor. When it was over, Vader had a burster sack on his elbow, and Canterbury had a major concussion. I felt bad about it, but hey, I'd suffered a lot over the years, and besides, I was a good guy now, a fan favorite, or babyface. A few days later, Orndorff approached me in the shower area. He said he knew coming in that this was probably the last shot at getting a good run with a major company. He told me that he'd just signed a contract with WCW, and he told me that he thought our match had a lot to do with him getting an offer. He wanted to say thank you. I thought that it was an incredibly classy thing, and I'm getting goosebumps writing about it now for a guy of his magnitude to say. Orndorff still works for WCW as a part of their front office staff, and if I really did play a part in getting him there, it makes me very proud. Chapter 18. Ding dong, the witch is dead, came the voice over the telephone. It was my old friend DDP, and it was his way of saying that Bill Watts had been let go. "That's great," I said, not really meaning it, but not wanting to be ostracized as a Bill Watts supporter. "But who's taking his place?" "Try to guess," said DDP. I tried a half dozen times, but failed. Finally, he gave the word, in all fairness to the guy, would change the face of wrestling quite a bit. Bish. I was stunned. Bish was Eric Bischoff, who had been until that time an announcer, and not a very good one. What I didn't know was that Bischoff had been impressing the Turner brass with his reasonable ideas and his smooth personality. In a sense, he had been impressing them by being everything that Bill Watts was not. The Turner people had been getting real tired of Cowboy Bill. He cursed like a sailor, peed in a garbage can at an office party, and was uncouth in general. He'd even punched Shane Douglas in order to get a cut on his head to swell up for the camera. If Shane had thought about it, he could have staggered up, fallen down the stairs, pooped his pants, and sued to become part owner of WCW. As it turns out, the final straw for Watts came when some comments that Bill had made to an underground newsletter became public and were brought to the attention of baseball home run king Hank Aaron, who had a front office job with Turner. The comments were construed as racist, which didn't sit well in a politically correct company like Turner's, and the cowboy was forced to ride out into the sunset. I may not have always liked what Bill did, and sometimes I didn't even like him, but I can't help feeling proud that I had the chance to work for him and that he respected me. About 5 years later, I actually had the opportunity to wrestle Cowboy Bill in Tulsa. The Undertaker had been hospitalized with a staph infection, and road agent Jack Lanza contacted Bill about coming in and wrestling Mankind. Mankind? Who the hell is that? Bill asked before being told that he was the former Cactus Jack. That night, Watts slapped Paul Bearer so hard he drew blood and backdropped me, threw me into the casket, and slammed the lid, all without losing his cowboy hat. I actually thought for a while that the whole Bischoff hiring was going to work out well for me. As an announcer, Eric had not exactly been the most respected guy among the wrestlers, and I was one of the few guys who hadn't treated him like a peon. I actually considered the guy a friend, and hey, there are worse things in the world than having a friend for your boss. Unfortunately, something happened that I hadn't counted on. Once in power, Eric made new friends, and dirty, unkempt Cactus Jack wasn't on the new list. Actually, I can't say Bischoff was ever bad to me, and maybe I wasn't completely off the list, but I had been pushed down it. A few personnel changes were made that didn't bode well for me. Jim Ross was taken off the air, saw the writing on the wall, and left shortly after. Eric's take on Ross was that he was fat, and he was Southern, and didn't play well to mainstream USA. Well, Jim Ross is still fat, and he's still Southern, but he's also the best announcer who's ever called a match, and he's a big reason that Raw is War is the hottest show in the country, which last time I checked included mainstream USA. That troubleshooting referee himself, Ole Anderson, was hired to help Dusty with the booking. With Ross, who was one of my biggest supporters, jumping ship, and Anderson, one of my biggest detractors, simultaneously jumping on board, I really didn't know what the future held for me. As it turned out, the future was a little rough on Cactus Jack. Within a month, I went from working main events to jerking the curtain, being the opening match. I had another problem in that I was having trouble getting the right reaction from the fans. Don't get me wrong, I was getting a great reaction when I came out, and I had very quickly become the number 2 good guy behind Sting, but it was hard for the heels to get any heat on me, because I had been portrayed for the last year and a half as a guy who not only felt little pain, false, but also seemed to enjoy it, even falser. The fans had little sympathy for me. I mean, why would they feel bad for someone who was doing something he loved? A match with Vader was a different story, though. We had recently had a match in Gainesville, Georgia, and Vader's stuff looked and was so devastating that the fans had rallied behind me during the heat. I called Dusty and set up a meeting wanting to stress the point that I was just a flesh and blood man who could be and had been injured. I thought a series of matches with Vader would help the fans see me in a more sympathetic light. I laid out a scenario to Dusty, one that culminated in a devastating injury. The Dream thought about it for a few minutes, then got a look on his face as if he'd just had a major revelation. He started to speak Dusty style in his excited, animated fashion. That's it, baby. When Vader hurts you, you'll have amnesia. You'll go home, but you won't even know your family. He continued to speak, but all I could think was how outlandish the whole thing was and that it would never work. Nobody was going to believe amnesia. This was WCW, damn it, not Days of Our Lives. I was just about to speak up when Dusty said the magic words. We'll take you off the road for 4 months and we'll pay you. Let me see. I could get buried and languish in the opening matches, or I could be with my wife and son for 4 months and come back in a main event feud. The choice wasn't difficult. When he asked me what I thought, I gushed. I love it, Dream. I really love it. Vader and I had 2 matches to set up the injury. I talked a little about the first one, but it was so brutal that it really deserves an extra little look. I thought the psychology was pretty simple. I get the living crap beaten out of me, but somehow pulled out a victory. I began talking to Vader about swelling my eye up a little bit, and he seemed to brush it off by offering me another idea. Maybe I can get a little blood from your nose, too. Okay, I said. Harley was there and helpfully offered to bust my eyebrow open. Busting an eyebrow is a little known and little exercised act of creating a gash over the eyebrow by punching downward with the point of the knuckles. When done correctly, it is as effective at creating realism as anything in the business. When done incorrectly, by stressing force over technique, it does nothing but raise welts. There were only a few people whom I trusted to bust me open, and Harley was one of them. Oddly, even though I have a reputation for being a hardcore legend, I was surprisingly inept when it came to eyebrow busting. One night in ECW in 1997, I tried to open up Tommy Dreamer, and I was failing miserably. After I bounced punches off his nose, cheek, and forehead, he looked at me and asked painfully, "Please stop hitting me." The bell rang and Vader started in. He pushed me into the turnbuckle, pushed my head back, and brought down four forearms in a row right across the bridge of my nose. Bam, 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 bam. You could actually hear the sick sound of his wrist bone breaking my nose. Vader looked for blood, and when he didn't see it, he became a man obsessed. He forgot all about the eye swelling and continually went after my nose. I wanted to tell the dumb bastard that I'd reconsidered, and that maybe he ought to think about stomping his foot on the mat instead. Finally, about a thimbleful of blood dribbled out, and he remembered our talk about the eye. Boom, boom, two punches to the cheek and eyebrow, and I went down. I have an unedited version of the tape. WCW refused to show some of it, and those two punches were awesome. I rolled out to the floor where Harley was waiting anxiously for his big punch. He took one look at me, however, and saw that blood was already streaming from both my eyebrow and cheek, in addition to the little dribble from my broken nose. Damn it, it's already done, grumbled a disappointed Harley as he rolled me back into the ring. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. The fans were completely caught up in the contest, as I think most of them could tell that something a little different was going on. Vader went for a splash against the rail and caught something but nothing but steel as I moved out of harm's way. One Cactus Jack upside down crack smash later, and I rolled back into the ring, the winner of a count-out victory. The fans reacted as if I just won the Super Bowl. It was a rare moment of real emotion in a promotion that was almost void of it. Believe it or not, the locker room was a huge celebration afterward. The other wrestlers were blown away by what they'd just seen. Even Ole Anderson came by and admitted that it had been a hell of a match. Lex Luger jokingly checked Ole's trousers to see if he had been aroused by the beating, as Ole was known to enjoy misery and human suffering. Vader and I hugged, and even Harley tried his best to put on a happy face despite the bitter letdown he'd just endured. I asked our TV people if they wanted to tape some fired up backstage interviews. They said they really didn't think they could air my face in its current state. The next day, Eric Bischoff told me that Turner wasn't going to allow the match to air, but that he was fighting them on the matter. I hated to think that the whole thing had been for naught. I'd been stitched up above my and below my eye, and my nose had been broken, causing both my eyes to blacken, and it dislocated my jaw. As a guy who had a martial arts background, Bischoff could appreciate what I've been through. Cactus, he said, I've had my ass kicked a lot of times, but never that bad, and never by someone I let do it. Little did Bischoff know that the worst ass kickings in his life would occur 6 years later in the Monday Night Ratings Wars. Zing. The match did air, and I have to, in all sincerity, thank Bischoff for taking his stand, but every drop of blood had been taken out. I don't know how many hours they spent trying to homogenize it, but by making liberal use of crowd shots, long shots, and major editing, it paled in comparison to the real deal. Tony Schiavone is actually a pretty good announcer, but his stomach seemed a little weak for it as he continually said, Oh my goodness, oh my goodness. Governor Ventura, who seemed to enjoy it, though. Jim Ross, who was at this time announcing for the World Wrestling Federation, left a message on my machine saying that he'd seen the match and really wished he'd been the one to call it. A strange thing happened right after the match aired. A commercial played hyping Slamboree, WCW's pay-per-view that paid homage to the stars of the past. I'll be damned if every star they showed, the Crusher, Vern Gagne, Blackjack Mulligan, wasn't wearing the crimson mask. I guess WCW's policy on blood was that they could air it if the footage was 20 years old, but week-old blood? No way. About a week later, I got a surprising phone call from the people in television production. They wanted to do promos for my return match with Vader that would air on the following Saturday, and they needed me right away. Oh yeah, they added before hanging up, we need you to look the way you did after the match. Hey, I thought that's just great. I had offered them the opportunity to capitalize on a unique situation, and they'd been too squeamish, and now they'd reconsidered. With the odd taping schedule WCW employed, however, the two matches were taped almost 2 weeks apart, even though they would air on consecutive Saturdays. By now, my wounds were all but healed. Now, in my book, yes, once again, it is my book, there is nothing quite as good as the real thing, but I was about to receive an A for effort. I must have looked like quite a sight as I barreled down Highway 75 in my '84 convertible with one hand on the wheel and the other brandishing a skin-removing square of sandpaper. At the stoplights, I threw punches at the rubbed raw cheekbone area for added emphasis. The return match was a scary, eerie night that I'll long remember. Before leaving home, I wrote a note for Colette. It was essentially a last will and testament, instructing her on what to do in case things didn't turn out too well. Thank God she never had to read it. I hope you don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that the ramifications of this match were tremendous and the risk of serious injury was extremely high. As the willing participant of a powerbomb on the concrete floor, I was putting myself in a precarious predicament. I was essentially letting the most dangerous man in the business perform the most dangerous move on a concrete floor. As mentioned earlier, I had seen Vader temporarily paralyze Joe Thurman with a move inside the ring that had some give to it. I had seen that powerbomb literally knock out others, and as mentioned earlier, I had seen some kids quit the company rather than risk the consequences of the powerbomb. The biomechanics of the powerbomb are simply flip your bent-over opponent in the air as high as possible and bring his back, neck, and head down to the canvas with as much force as possible. It can be scary to watch. Something seemed wrong when I walked into center stage that afternoon. The hallway seemed a little darker, and the atmosphere seemed a little heavier. Dusty called me into his office. Just for the record, Cactus, the dream stated without his usual animation, I don't want you to do this. I think by saying this, Dusty was relieving both his conscience and any legal liability that the company might have. I appreciate that, Dusty, I said, but this is important to me. Vader also tried to talk me out of it, but again I said no. I had an interview scheduled for the middle of the show. Dusty wanted to talk to me about it. Again, he was uncharacteristically low key. Cactus, when you get this interview, I don't want you to think beforehand about anything you're going to say. This is an emotional night. I want the fans to feel your emotion. This was a valuable piece of advice, and with the knowledge that Dusty Rhodes was one of the great promo men in the business, I took it to heart. As good as many of my promos were, I had the habit of walking around backstage before interviews, practicing what I was going to say. That night from center stage, I spoke right from the heart. I honestly can't remember what I said, but that night, as is true in most cases, it's not as much what you say that's important, but how it's said. I'll always be thankful to the Dream for that small piece of advice that would make my later ECW interviews so memorable. The match itself was a solid piece of business. Many considered it to be better than the first, although obviously I couldn't absorb the same shots to the face again. As the match grew to a conclusion, I attempted another Cactus Jack upside down crack smash, the same move that had led me to victory a week before. This time Harley jerked Vader out of the way, and I landed hard on the blue protective mat. As Shivani and Ventura called the action, Vader threw back the black mats, revealing the cold concrete floor below. I was crossing myself as Vader picked me up off the floor. As he put my head between his massive thighs, I was thinking out loud, I love you, Colette. I love you, my tiny man. Vader crouched down and with all his might lifted me into the air. My God, if he does that, he'll kill him, yelled Shivani. A moment later, I hit the concrete. My initial reaction was strange. That didn't feel too bad, but I bet it didn't look too good on TV. Then my right foot and hand went numb. I lay there for about 40 minutes while we waited for an ambulance. Now, a lot of fans speculated that I wasn't as hurt as I acted, and to some extent that was true. I probably could have moved, but the longer I lay there with the other wrestlers all around me, the more I thought I really was in trouble. After a few minutes, I became scared to even try to move my hand and foot. How you doing, you sexy thing? Asked Scorpio in an attempt to get me to laugh. Scorp, I said softly, I can't move my foot. Sorry, replied Too Cold. The ambulance finally arrived and I was put on a stretcher. Several people in the audience were crying. I was placed in the ambulance, and of all people, Jesse Ventura came along for the ride. As the ambulance pulled away with sirens wailing, the show faded to black. It was great drama. Was it staged? Yes, but in many ways it was real nonetheless. I was wheeled into the hospital, and while strapped to the gurney, I was asked by an especially sensitive fan if I would pose for a picture with her. Upon admission, I was checked out thoroughly, given a battery of tests, including a CAT scan that revealed, you guessed it, a concussion. X-rays were taken and fortunately revealed no fractures. The doctor informed me that I had suffered a severe blow to the back of my head, which had likely caused my brain to more or less short-circuit, causing the temporary loss of sensation in my extremities. I was given a list of things to do and not to do, and was released at about 1 a.m. Janie Engel, a WCW front office employee, drove me home. I was groggy, but all things considered, I felt pretty fortunate. In reality, Vader had taken care of me pretty well. He had followed through with me and released me low to ensure a safer landing. If it had been a typical Vader powerbomb, things might have been a lot worse. Pull over, please, I asked Janie about a mile or two from my house. I proceeded to bolt out of the car and left remnants of my pre-match meal all over Highway 575. When I got home, Colette met me at the door and gave me a long embrace. I went upstairs and kissed my sleeping little buddy, then went into our bedroom where, against doctor's orders, I fell asleep myself. I woke to the ringing of the phone. I just called to check on you, said a weathered, slightly inebriated voice on the phone. It was handsome Harley. Do you think it went okay, I asked. Harley paused and softly, for Harley said, Cactus, it couldn't have gone better if we'd done it 100 times. He spoke one more time before he hung up. You're the new Harley Race kid. That was the greatest compliment I have ever received.